She had enjoyed the North and that John had made it there even more so, standing with him in the crypts and speaking to his mother, seeing the winter roses, one of which she had pressed into a handkerchief. Each day she'd been there had been one she'd remember for the rest of her life, and while she was sad to see John go and also to leave herself, she looked forward to going home, that they had headed to Bear Island and would be taking the ship from there rather than White Harbor had made their journey a little different. Sansa having to say goodbye to her brother earlier than she'd expected, and Marjorie telling both Willa and Winifred how much she'd missed them. The travel, too, was different. The Mormonts moved faster and were a little rougher around the edges than the Manderleys. For Marjorie, though, it also gave her the opportunity to meet her aunt again, and they stayed on Bear Island for a few days. Gerald was running around now, and Marjorie found herself almost shocked he'd grown so much since she'd seen him last. Her aunt was glad to see her too, and when the ship arrived to take them to Old Town, Marjorie almost didn't wish to travel. "We could ask them to stop, in Lannisport," surprised John. Sansa said as they stood on the deck one night. "I think we've surprised each other enough. I'd like to, though, but it's perhaps for the best if we head home," she said. And Sansa nodded. Her friend wished to see Highgarden again as much as she did. They didn't spend long in Old Town, and yet she was called to speak to her grandfather and uncles, Baelor, Garth, Gunthor, and Humphrey, all waiting for her when she arrived at her grandfather's solar. She felt nervous for some reason, and then she realized that something had happened. Her Uncle Baelor had traveled with her grandmother, and she wondered if they knew, something she found out for certain a moment later. "It's good to see you well, granddaughter, and I'd wish to be speaking to you on less important things, but Baelor brings news from your grandmother which I must speak on," her grandfather said, looking inquisitively at her. "Of course, grandfather," she said with a smile. "Sir Jon Snow, Marjorie, he's not who we've all thought he was, and by all accounts is someone we hope he is. Can you confirm for me his name?" her grandfather asked, and Marjorie took a breath. Briefly, for a moment, she considered not saying it, but she knew she must. "Jaehaerys Targaryen, grandfather. He's the true-born son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen, and the man I am to marry," she said with a smile. "You are?" Baelor asked happily. "Ooh. Jon and I love one another, Uncle. I loved him before I knew who he truly was, and while the agreement was done, we were unaware of it. We wish to wed, and we will be," she said, and saw her grandfather smile. "I am most pleased to hear it, granddaughter. Most pleased, more so now that I can see your own happiness with the arrangement." Her grandfather said, "I am happy, grandfather. Jon is a good man, and he'll make a great king," she said proudly. "And you'll make a great queen niece. Congratulations," her Uncle Gunthor said, and one by one they spoke to her. It was as she was going to her bed that her grandfather stopped by her room, her aunt walking beside her, and Melora looked every inch the name she'd sometimes heard people use for her. The Mad Maid, they called her, and looking at her straggly hair and her tattered clothing, Marjorie felt she fit that description. Yet when she spoke there was no madness there, and her words made her think of something had Jon said about things he'd seen. "I've seen you wear a crown, niece. Seen you ride beside your husband on a dragon. Have I dreamed these things? Do the dragons fly once more?" Melora asked, her voice filled with a little doubt. "You have not, Aunt. Jon has brought dragons back. I've seen and touched one myself," she said, and Melora seemed to relax, but not as much as her grandfather did. "For too long I've felt the voices in my head to be the signs of losing my mind. I thank you, niece," Melora said as she moved to walk away. "Aunt, grandfather, can you come in for a moment? I need to speak to you both," she said, and her grandfather did as she asked, Melora seeming happy to walk with him. Once inside, they sat down, and Marjorie walked to where she kept the glass candle. She had expected this night to be her speaking to Jon alone, but something about her aunt's words and the look on her face made her need them to see this. When they saw the glass candle, she saw both of them look at it with interest, even more so when she put it on the table between them. "Don't be alarmed by what you hear," she said. And they sat there waiting until Jon's voice spoke. "Marjorie," he said softly. "Jon, I'm here. I'm not alone, John. My grandfather and aunt are here with me. John, I need you to do something for me, she said, and her grandfather looked from her to her aunt, and then both of them looked to the glass candle. Anything, just name it, John said, and she saw her grandfather smile. John, my aunt hears voices. She sees things, and they upset her. She isn't sure where they come from and what they mean, she said. And when her grandfather went to say something, she shook her head and smiled, mouthing trust me's to him. She's a green seer, John said, and both her grandfather and aunt looked to each other. John, you know of this? Her aunt asked, and she smiled when she heard John say her aunt's name. Lady Melora, I too am a green seer, and I know the way it makes you feel, the thoughts you know not, whether they are yours, someone else's, or if they are real. John said. You can help, John, her grandfather asked. There are some books you may be able to get from the Citadel, my lord. Some I have myself in my possession. If they don't help fully, then when I can, I'll come to speak to you both, John said as he gave them the names of the books. Her grandfather and aunt left, and after speaking to John for some time, she said her goodbyes to him, and then walked to her aunt's rooms at the top of the tower. Inside the room, she found her aunt laying in her bed and her grandfather sitting down looking at her in what seemed to be a far better mood. That was the king, her grandfather asked. I have known him as John for so long that I cannot wrap my head around his other name. I know I'll have to, she said with a smile. Thank him for me if you see him before I do, for Melora too, her grandfather said, and Marjorie looked to her aunt, seeing her sleeping and looking peaceful. It's rare she lays down herself, too afraid of what the night would bring, so to see it fills my heart with joy, granddaughter. They were breaking their fast the next morning when the ravens arrived, and Marjorie could barely believe them. Cersei dead, Joffrey dead, Tommen and Myrcella named traitors. Once again she was asked to join her grandfather, and once again found her uncles waiting with him when she got there. Tommen is squire to the king, is he not? She heard her grandfather ask her uncle as she took a seat. He is father, Baelor said. Marjorie, the king, will he give up Tommen? Her grandfather asked, and she shook her head. No, never, she said, and saw her grandfather nod to her uncle. I'll be coming with you to Highgarden, Marjorie, as will your uncle Gunthor. We will not be coming alone. Your grandmother told us the king wished to wait 6 moons for a war. Well, the war is upon us, and the banners will soon be called. This morning father sent out word to call ours, and together we ride, her uncle Baelor said, and Marjorie looked to them nervously, knowing that what they said was true. Before she got the chance to move or say anything, though her grandfather stood up and bid his sons do likewise, motioning for her to stay in her seat. We ride to crown a king and queen, to Jaehaerys and Marjorie, the king and queen of the 7 kingdoms, he said. Jaehaerys and Marjorie, her uncle said, and she felt her heart race at the words. Winterfell 297 AC, Ned Stark. He had hoped to have more time with his new wife, even after knowing Jon's mind on things. The meeting in the Godswood, one he'd not attended but heard about from Wyman and Jon after it happened. Ned had both been a little annoyed that they'd held a meeting without him, and glad of it. Proud, too, that Jon felt comfortable enough to do so. But it was knowing that Jon wished him time with Elle that had won out in the day, and so after listening to what had been said, he welcomed the time it would give him. Time that now was something they had none of. The first raven had been a shock to him, the second more expected, and so his own had gone out. Word had spread and the banners had been called. Ned sitting back and readying himself to tell the truth to those who didn't know of it. Galbert and Rickard would moan. Roose would take issue, and Robert would rant and rave. Those he knew of. It was others he wondered about. The Wolves and the Flints, the other mountain clans, some of the smaller houses too. That the ones who knew arrived first only showed that once the news had spread of Robert's actions, they had known what would come next. That Jon would not let this stand, and the war they thought moons away was upon them now. He looked down at the raven Jon had sent to the realm and wondered if this was what Robert had received, and if so, how had he reacted when he did? How had John Aaron reacted? And now how would others? They are ready, my love, Elle said, and he walked over and kissed her softly on the lips, her eyes looking into his fearfully. I wish we had more time, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Come back to me, my love. Come back when this is done, and we'll have the rest of our lives, she said. And Ned nodded. The ale was being drunk and the great hall was full, Ned looking to see the great John and Mage along with Jorah. He saw Wyman and Wyllis and was glad the Lord had come himself. He'd need Wyman's words before the night was through. In the corner, Roose sat with the Risewells and the Dustins, his son and heir by his side, Ned smiling when he saw the mountain clans and the nod he received from Big Bucket. Seeing Donald Flint, Brandon Norrie, and Torrin Little with his sons made him feel a tinge of pride and one of sadness, as these men were to soon learn a hidden truth. Beside him, Robb sat along with Medja, his good father having been told the truth only a day or so ago, that he'd welcomed it, only making Ned feel relief. And as he brought his mug down, it was time to see what others would say. My lords, my ladies of the North, it both fills me with pride as a Stark to see so many of you answer the call, and with sadness that I've had need to send one at all, he said. And the room hushed. The Ned calls and the wool comes, Hugo shouted loudly. We're here. Now who the fuck are we to fight? A voice shouted out, and Ned smirked despite what he was about to say. Some of you may have received the ravens, heard what has taken place in King's Landing. For those who have not, I'll speak it plain. The king has executed his wife for adultery. He murdered her son with his bare hands, he said. And he saw people look to him when he had said the word murder. Ned, a voice called out, and he shook his head and continued. He's ordered that Myrcella and Tommen are to lose their heads, and has put to sword every man and woman who were part of the Queen's guard and household. 2 of his own King's guard lost their heads, one for adultery and one for fulfilling his oaths and protecting his charge. Now he calls for the North to go to war with the West, to take up arms against House Lannister, he said. He looked to the room and saw even those who didn't know the truth begin to look at each other, and yet it was Roose he found himself concentrating on, the Leech Lord sitting quietly. My lords, even were it not for all House Lannister and the West has done for the North, I'd not be able to answer this call. 4 and 10 years ago I stood in a hall when Robert was presented with the body of babes. In front of me and many others, he claimed to see none, only dragon spawn, and it was that and what I found later at a tower in Dorne that forced my hand and led me to the decisions I made, he said. He looked out once more and saw Barbary move forward in her seat, as did some others in the room. My lords, Jon Snow is not my son. He is my nephew, the true-born son of Prince Rhaegar and Princess Lyanna Targaryen, and the rightful king of the 7 kingdoms, he said, and the voices began to rise. Rape. He heard. Kidnap. Lies. Slamming his hand on the table, he eventually got the room to quiet. Or truth be told, lie it did when she began to howl, and when people sat down, he began to get ready to tell the truth. He'd kept hidden from so many of them. Ned looked to see the Blackfish sitting at the back of the room staring at him. After seeing what Robert had allowed and traveling to find my sister, after fighting a war and then through 3 of the finest knights that ever graced the land, I found myself faced with a sister whose time was coming to an end. A sister who begged me to look after her son, made me promise to the old gods to see the boy safe and to tell him the truth one day. By the gods, I swear, had Jaime Lannister not come, I may not have done so. I tell you all freely here in this room that I was on the verge of failing that boy. I had failed that boy, he said, and looked down to the table. You're saying the rebellion was a lie? Barbary shouted at him. No, I'm saying there was more to it, much more, things I didn't know then, and things that were, it not for my nephew. None of us would know now. Rhaegar never kidnapped my sister. They married under the old gods, and the new married, and in a letter to Robert told him of that marriage. Did he share this letter with any of you? With me? Or did he allow us to believe the lie? All for what? To get my sister back or to put himself on a throne he didn't deserve? Ned said, "Yet you kept this from us." Rickard Karstark said loudly, I kept it from you. My first obligation was to my sister's son, and then to my king." Ned paused as he began to look around the room. "From the moment he went to the west, my nephew has worked to help the north, worked to put coin in all of your pockets. The Reach, the West, houses that were loyal to both his families. He's worked to see we've all had it better than we ever had under any king before him. All of you passed through Wintertown. You think that was my idea? That the people who came north in search of a better life did so because of me? No, my nephew did that. My king did that." Ned said, his voice showing his pride at the end. "You're asking us to rise against your foster brother, your foster father, for a damn dragon." Galbart said, though there was less anger in his voice. Ned readied himself to answer, but Howland stood up and began to speak. For Lyanna's boy, for a son of the North, who even though he left, never forgot the North in all his time away. What has Robert Baratheon ever done for you, Rickard? Or for you, Roose? That work you've done to your keep, Galbart, that work you're so proud of. Where did the coin come for that? Howland asked. I fought against the dragons because the Ned said so, because of what they'd done to the Rickard, the Brandon. You tell me now, the Ned, am I to fight with you today? Torrin Little said, and Ned saw the other mountain clan leaders look to him. Why should we fight for any of them? If the stag kept this from us, then fuck him. But you've kept it from us too, Ned. Your nephew has dragon blood. And we all saw the last time a dragon sat the throne. I may believe you about Lyanna and Rhaegar, but that doesn't change the fact that a dragon killed our liege and his heir. That's why I rose. Why should I rise again? Roderick Risewell said, and Ned could see some lords nodding along. Ned watched as Lord Jorah stood up, the bearskin cloak wrapped around his shoulders as he looked to the high table and nodded to him. This time we rise not just for a dragon, but for a wolf also, Jorah Mormont said, looking around the room. Aye, we can curse a lad for one side of his blood, but do we forget the other? Was it not that lad who brought direwolves back to the north? Is his own direwolf not a gift from the old gods? Jorah said. Ned tried not to smile as Jorah sat and the Great John rose. I care not for who sits the throne. We've seen it afore, stag or dragon. They care not for me or mine. They know nothing of the north, of the lands we live in. The wolfswood means nothing to them. Fuck me, even their gods are wrong. The Great John said to laughs. But a king with stark blood in his veins, a king who cares enough to give away his own damn coin so children don't go hungry. A king who kneels and prays to the old gods and walks around with a wolf so fucking quiet, I damn near shit myself every time it's around. The Great John said to even louder laughs. That's something I've never had in my life, something none of us has ever had, a king from the north. The Great John had no sooner sat down than Wyman stood, the Lord of White Harbor, one Ned was happy to hear from. I've never met a lad like him. None of us have, you all know it. Most of you have said it to me or others at some time or another. Be it the wolf by his side, as the Great John says, or the work he's done that's benefited us all, as Ned brought up. Is there a man or woman in this room who doesn't think Jon Snow is a lad they'd like to call their own son? Wyman said, and as Ned looked around the room he could see some smiles. War is upon us, my lords. Should Robert win and the North not fight on his side, then you think he'll let us sit in peace? Should Jon Snow win, and mark my words, my lords, he will win. Do you think he'll forget that we didn't rise? Wyman said. Ned looked around and saw the hushed whispers, the lords speaking to their heirs and their lealest men. That boy is of the North, my lords, and the North remembers, Wyman said. He heard some of the whispers after Wyman spoke, lords mouthing the words, though Meg stood up before anyone else could. I love the Lady Lyanna. She was my friend, and I like all mourned her loss. I blame the dragons and Rhaegar. though I knew that she never cared for Robert. And I, like most of the men in this room, saw as we marched to find her and avenge Rickard and Brandon. We saw, each night we saw it, that man loved no one but himself. Mage said, and the looks on the Lord's faces was one he'd remember for some time. Aye, but we marched for a lie, Mage, Roose said softly. A lie. None of us knew at the time, Roose, Mage said, and Roose nodded. My family has benefited greatly by knowing Lyanna's boy. My daughter makes me kin with the Lannisters, and so my choice is clear. Bear Island rises, my lords. We rise and we march with Lyanna's boy, the king from the north. He looked out as the Great John stood up, as Wyman did. Barbie Dustin rising next, Rickard and Galbert, Robet and Roderick. Medger stood up beside him and he washed his big bucket and the others rose too. Rob stood up, and then Ned reached down and picked up his mug of ale, watching as others did the same. J. Harry's Targaryen, the king from the north, he said loudly. The king from the north. The voices rang out, and when he sat back down, he felt both the relief that he'd managed to get them to rise and the pride that they rose for our son. River Run 29-7 AC. Cat. When Edmure had read The Raven from King's Landing, he had been in as much shock as she had. Finding out that the queen had cuckolded her husband was something they'd never have expected. That she'd done it for all three of the children made them fear for the realm. War was inevitable. The queen would lose her head. And even if that was not enough to force the Lannisters into action, the words on the Raven's scroll would do that. Reason? He asked, as she shared his confusion. I don't understand it, the queen. But the children? Bastards they may be, but does that deserve them losing their heads? Utherides said as he sat with them in her solar. They are pretending to be what they are not, claiming to be princes and princesses, and to have the right to something they do not have. She said. Kat found that ever since she found out about the truth of their birth, her feelings about them had changed. Did this not prove the duplicitous nature of bastards? Prove they would always find a way to take what wasn't theirs by right? Myri. She shuddered, thinking that she'd wished her daughter married to the prince, and even more when she remembered Bran was betrothed to the princess. Taking comfort, at least, that neither of those things could ever happen now. We may need to call the banners, my lord, Utherides said. If the king calls for us, then we will. Until then, we do nothing. Edmure said, this will mean war. Edmure, of that we can be certain. The Lannisters will not give up their kin. We've both seen how much they care for bastards, she said and saw her brother nod. Aye, but I'll not call my banners until I'm asked. Maybe there won't be a war. Maybe they'll realize the odds they face will be too much. The Vale, Stormlands, the Reach, and the Riverlands, the North. No, there may be no war at all, Edmure said with a smile, as she shook her head at her brother's stupidity. She didn't think Ned would rise against the West, and given how close the bastard was to the Reach, they may not rise either. With both of them sitting out the war, it became a different animal, she thought. While she wasn't well thought in military matters, she was her father's daughter, and he had always explained things to her, he and her uncle. War may start out as a just cause, but soon it became about what benefit there was in sending your men to fight. What gains could you make? That night she lay in her bed and the dreams came, terrible dreams. Dreams of River Run in flames, of Edmure's head on a spike. Dreams of herself being dragged out and manhandled to a block. Around her faces looked on as a man in shiny armor made his way towards her, a thin sword in his hand, and she knew who it was. She woke up before Jon Snow could bring down the sword, and after getting a drink of water, she paced her room. A dream. It's just a dream, she said, but the thoughts wouldn't leave her. She dressed and walked from her room, soon finding herself on the parapets looking down on the tumblestone and the Red Fork. Her mind was troubled as she began to think about the war to come. Edmure could hope it wouldn't arrive, but war was inevitable. They needed River Run to be ready, and so she resolved to set to work on the morrow, hoping that she'd at least get the time to properly prepare. My lady, Lord Edmure is looking for you. "There's been a raven from the hand of the king," Pearl said as she woke her the next day. "My dress," she said, and the girl grabbed her dress and helped her into it. Kat, annoyed to find she'd slept late when she had so much to do. Walking to her brother's solar, she could see the heightened activity, the guards more on alert and men running to and fro. She saw Sir Desmond, and the man seemed to be rushing to follow some order or other, and she knew then that her worst fears had come to pass. Hurrying, she found Edmure with Utharides and Sir Robin Ryger, looking over a map on her brother's desk. Her brother wearing armor that briefly made her think of her father doing the same thing in this very same room. Though unlike her father, Edmure didn't carry the same presence, nor have her uncle standing by his side. "Cat, from Lord John," Edmure said, and Utharides handed her the raven scroll, Cat taking it from him and reading it, almost knowing what it would say before she did so. "Lord Tully, by order of his grace, Robert Baratheon." The first of his name, King of the Andals, Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, you are hereby called to arms. Call your banners, my lord, for the king has need of them. We march to war. Lord John Arryn, Hand of the King. She handed the scroll back to Utharides and stood as Edmure told Sir Robin what to do, finding she didn't agree with him but knowing now was not the time to speak up. When Sir Robin left, Cat turned to Utharides and asked him for a full accounting of their stores and to have Sir Desmond come to meet her to discuss the keep's defenses, Edmure getting a put-out look on his face. "I'm lord here, Cat. I am capable of seeing to River Run," he said petulantly, and she knew she had to tread carefully. "Of course you can, brother, but you're also Lord Paramount of the Trident, and his grace will be looking to you on the battlefield. You have to concern yourself with a war, brother. Organizing the lords of the Riverlands to ready to ride is most important. I'd take what I could off your shoulders, leave you to the most important work while I did the mundane," she said, and tried not to shake her head when he puffed up. "Forgive me, Cat. Thank you. I'd be lost here without you," he said, and she knew he was placating her, but she also knew it was the truth. "Have you sent the ravens?" she asked, and saw him smile. "Utharides sent them this morning. This is what we've been waiting for, Cat," Edmure said, and she frowned before she schooled her features. "Edmure? The bastard, Cat. He's on the wrong side of this. The might of the realm is marching for him, and I'll see him dead," Edmure said, and despite her worries, she began to smile, the idea one she found most pleasing. After checking with Utharides and finding they had enough food in their stores for almost 2 years, Cat finding herself proud that she'd seen that mistake rectified. She and the steward spoke to Sir Desmond and found the defenses to be sound, and she took some comfort in that, little knowing that it was the last piece of comfort she'd feel for quite some time. The first sign that all was not right was when, after Houses Ryger, Vance, and Piper arrived, and it soon became clear that things in King's Landing had been far worse than she'd imagined. She listened in shock at some of the tales that Sir Mark and Sir Hugo told of Robert's rage. The killing of the entire household, the beating to death of the prince, Cersei's final words, all of it made her sick to her stomach, and were it that alone then, she'd have felt concern. The lack of any of the major houses arriving worried her. Sir Mark and Sir Hugo, along with Edmure, were sure that raising more men took more time. Yet Cat thought that surely they'd have sent word by now. They'd have at least let them know they were on their way. When word did come, it was even worse than she'd feared. House Mallister and House Blackwood hadn't raised arms. Edmure was furious and wished to ride out to meet them, threatening to strip them of their titles for this embarrassment. Cat finding the fear of the reason why they'd not risen to be more worrisome than any embarrassment it may cause. "A raven, my lord, most strange," Utharides said, running into Solar, a panicked look on his face. "From who, Utharides?" she asked. "It bears the seal of House Targaryen, my lady," the steward said, and she looked to see the 3-headed dragon and felt a shiver which she shook off. She watched as Edmure broke the seal and read it, her brother's eyes going wide and then his face going pale. Edmure, what is it? She asked as the scroll dropped from his hand to the table. Cat moved quickly and picked it up, and as she read the words, she felt her heart almost stop. To House Tully. Almost 300 years ago, my family raised yours up, made you what you are, and asked for nothing but your loyalty in return. In our hour of need, you went back on the oaths you swore. For gain and advancement, you turned your back on my house. I hold your house as responsible as the stags and the falcons for the loss of my family, Lord Tully. It was because of your actions that I was forced to hide and forswear my family name. Yet even here you sought to become an oathbreaker once more and sent men to bring me down. A dragon never forgets, Lord Tully. It never forgives, and the time for retribution is at hand. No longer will I go by the name I was forced to hide under. No longer will my house hide in the shadows. Now those who wronged me will seek to hide, but know this, my lord, I see you, I've always seen you. From the moment I unhorsed you in King's Landing to the next time I look in your eyes, House Tully has only survived because of a dragon's will. And this dragon wills it no more. Jon Snow is dead. Lord Tully, and he was the one person who kept you alive. My name is Jaehaerys Targaryen, and when I'm finished, all debts will be paid. House Tully will pay theirs in fire and blood. Jaehaerys Targaryen, the true king. She woke up convinced it had been a dream, a terrible, horrible dream, and then she saw the Maester and Utherides. She saw her brother, and he looked as if he'd aged many years. He didn't even ask if she was well or how she felt. Didn't even bother to offer her some form of concern or let her know he cared. What have we done? He said. And she could hear the fear in his voice. She could hear it because she knew her own would sound the very same. The fear in her heart threatened to overwhelm her, and as she sat there, she began to cry. Through her tears, she could see it now. The dream she had wasn't a dream at all. It was a vision, and one she wasn't sure she could hide from. Riverrun Edmure herself, all of them covered in fire and blood. King's Landing, 297 AC. Jon Arryn. He looked over the ravens and found himself happy to see them. Edmure had called his banners, and Stannis and Renly were doing the same. The Knights of the Vale had begun to assemble also. For the past few days, Robert had even stopped drinking and had begun to cut down on his eating too. That he was unable to lift his hammer had been an eye-opener to the king, and they'd needed to get another lighter one made. But it at least had an effect, and he now spent time in the yard each day. Jon had so much work, and it bothered him that because of this war, he couldn't spend his time doing what needed to be done. They had to name more guards to the King's Guard, and Jon had sent another raven to the Lannisters, this time for Sir Barristan's eyes. He knew they'd not give the prince up, and he couldn't ask Sir Barristan to bring him back. He could, however, order the Lord Commander to return, and they had need of him. Strange things were happening in the city, and a part of him wondered if the Lannisters had been preparing for this war for some time. Lomas seemed to think so. The Master of Whisperers telling him that the Lannister manse had emptied and the buildings they worked from no longer held men. There wasn't a pinnacle ship in the docks either, and he cursed Robert for that. Had he held his rage then, they could have taken one or more of those ships for themselves. Lord Baelish, my lord, a servant said, and Petter walked in and took a seat opposite him. Peter, tell me you found them, he asked hopefully. No, my lord. All the names you gave me, not one of them is here in the city. They've all just disappeared. Peter said, his frustration clear. This is most odd. Who the hell would wish to make off with the king's bastards? He asked, though it was more to himself than seeking any real answer. I do not know. Perhaps we should ask Lomas, my lord? Aye, come, we've a meeting to attend, he said, and they stood up and walked to the small council chambers. Inside it was just Gorman, and he shook his head and wondered why he'd actually called this meeting. Renly and Stannis were both away raising their banners. He should have just called the Grand Maester to his solar. He actually thought he had for a moment until Robert came in. The king was walking with Lomas, and Jon was happy to see a smile on his face, something that had been sorely lacking these past few weeks. Ned's called the banners Jon, Robert said, and Jon looked to Lomas, who nodded. I had thought. he said, but Robert's mood was too good to let him finish the sentence. I fucking told you, he's my brother John, my brother by choice. I fucking told you he'd not sit this out, Robert said, and John felt a sense of relief, as their odds had just got a lot better. This is great news, Your Grace. Lord Edmure has sent a raven saying he too has called his men, Stannis and Renly too, and Jon has said the Knights of the Vale are ready to ride, he said, and saw Robert's eyes light up. The Tyrells? The king asked. No word, my lord. The ravens have been sent, but I've received no word, Gorman said. I heard a whisper about Old Town, my king, but I've not been able to confirm that Lord Leighton raised his banner, Loma said. What is that fat fuck thinking, John? Robert asked, and Peter answered for him. I believe Lord Mace is doing what he does best, Your Grace. Peter said, What? Eating and looking fucking stupid, Robert said, laughing loudly. Listening to Lady Olenna, I think Petyr means, he said, and Robert's smile went from his face. I don't fucking need the Reach, the Stormlands, the Vale, the Riverlands, now with the North, Illyrio said. His men are on the way too, are they not? Robert said. They are, my lord. The Golden Company should arrive within a moon or two. Aye, so the old cunt may think she'll get a queen for her support. I'll not fucking give it to her. As she rose and came, then I'd think of it. The girl is a beauty after all. Robert said, and John tried not to look at the expression on his face. But fuck them. Send ravens to their bannermen directly. Call them to arms. Your Grace, surely there is another way, Gorman said. I forgot they were your kin. Fine, send a raven yourself. Grand Maester, tell the old witch what you heard here. Tell her how much of my displeasure she's incurred, and warn her what will happen if she dallies any longer. Robert said, and the Grand Maester was up and out of the room in the blink of an eye. Never thought he could move so fast, Your Grace, Peter said, and Robert laughed. However, it may be that a match is for the best. My king, the Reach is gold, the forces. We all know what Olenna truly wants, and you can offer it to her you should before someone else does. Don't fucking tell me what I should do, Robert said loudly. I didn't mean it like that, my king, I was suggesting, Peter said. Peter is right, Your Grace. We should make the offer. Who else is suitable as your bride? And we needs must have heirs, Robert. As of now, Stannis is next in line, he said, and knew by the grimace on the king's face it had worked. Very well, Baelish, go do the damn deal, Robert said, standing up. Robert, I need Peter here, he said, his voice almost panicked. You don't get it both ways, John. You want this fucking match. Then send him to make it happen, the king said, leaving. He knew he had no choice, and so he and Petter met often over the next few days, and he even ate with him, Lysa and their son, the night before he set out for the Reach. Lysa was upset to see him go, but then so was he, both of them glad when he said he'd return swiftly. With Petter gone, he met with Illyrio himself even more now. The Magister settled in King's Landing, and keeping him informed of the movements of the Golden Company. The sheer mass of men he was moving from Essos, and the cost of it. One he was glad that Illyrio was putting up, though he knew that in lands and coin, they'd end up footing most of the bill later on. He was feeling relaxed when the ravens came, Stannis having trouble with the lords of the Narrow Sea. Not a surprise. Renly saying the Lord of the Stormlands had risen, though, had been far better news. When the acolyte arrived at the door, he could sense the nervousness of the boy, the lad's hands shaking as he handed him the scroll. John thought he was seeing things when he looked at the seal, and his own hand shook when he broke it. Lord John Arryn, hand to the usurper. The time has come, my lord, to pay the debt you owe my family, a debt payable only with blood. Something you should know all about, Lord Arryn, as the blood of my family is on your hands, and I hold you and the usurper you serve fully responsible. Truth can only remain hidden for so long. My lord, eventually it must be brought to light. And so it's time for you to learn my truth, and for the realm to learn yours. You sought not to remove a tyrant from a throne, not to seek justice for men who'd fallen, but to place a puppet in the place of the rightful king, my father before me. My brother before me, both of them will work through me as I come for you. My lord, both of them will see me as I strike you and your puppet king down. For Elia, for Rhaenys, for Aegon, for Rickard, for Brandon, and for my mother and father, for 4 and 10 years I've kept my truth hidden and allowed you to keep hiding your own. As high as honor are merely the words of your house, and mine own seem more apt. Jon Snow is no more my lord. The name I was forced to hide under is a badge of shame I carry no longer. My name is Jaehaerys Targaryen, true-born son of Lyanna and Rhaegar Targaryen. And I'm coming for you, Lord Aaron, for your house and for your puppet king. I'm coming. Winter is coming. Winter is coming with fire and blood. Jaehaerys Targaryen. There had been few times that Jon Arryn had run, but he ran from the room to the maester's tower and found Gorman wasn't there. And then he knew. He hadn't been the only one to receive such a letter. By the time he reached Maegor's, he was out of breath, sweating, and his heart was racing. Still, he heard the shouts and the sounds of the things breaking. He ran towards the king's rooms and saw the girls run from it, one with a busted lip and the other just looking terrified. Moving towards the door, he heard the scream and had never heard Robert so loud. Dragons spawn. The realm reacts. Riverlands. Tytos Blackwood. The raven had come from Edmure, and he and his sons had spoken and ignored it. For now, at least. Then the word had come from King's Landing, and he'd felt it right. He'd done so. He didn't wish a war, and not one with the Lannisters. Not only did he have one of his lads fostered there, but Edmure leading them into battle would be the end of them. Finding out what the king had actually done, he was disgusted. The queen had committed adultery, and she'd have to pay for it, he understood that. Wanting the children dead, beating one of them to death with his bare hands in front of the boy's mother, to kill the entire household and then display their heads for all to see. No. That was too much. He was sitting in the hall when Lucas came running in, his son having ridden to Seaguard while Hoster had ridden to Stonehenge. Finding the Jonos hadn't risen, it almost made him do so, but he wanted to know more first. Brynden motioned his brother over, and they sat there while Lucas swallowed some water and ate a mouthful of bread and cheese. His son had ridden hard, he was proud to see. "Well?" he asked. "The Malisters make no move, father. None," Lucas said, and he nodded. "Then it seems we were right not to," Brynden said. "Aye, but I don't know if we'll be able to sit this out once the king rides," he said worriedly. "Perhaps we should." "Dark here," Lucas said. But the maester, running in agitatedly, soon stopped his son from finishing his thought. "My lord, a raven," the maester said, and when he saw the seal, he knew why the man seemed so harried. "Is that?" Brynden asked as he saw the three-headed dragon. "Aye," he said, opening it excitedly. "To House Blackwood, my family shares blood with yours, my lord. Blood I respect, blood I cherish. For 4 and 10 years, among the many lies spread about my mother and father, another lie slipped by unnoticed, one which perhaps saved my life. From the moment I found out the truth, I've prepared for this day, prepared to take back what was taken from my family, and to see justice dealt to those who played their part. We are kin, my lord, and no matter your response, I'll remember that first and foremost. I seek Leo men, Leo lords. I seek my family to take back what is mine by right. For years I've hidden under a false name, but no more. My uncle named me Jon Snow for my protection. My mother and father named me Jaehaerys Targaryen after the kings who came before me. I ask you to name me kin and fight by my side. Jaehaerys Targaryen. Tytos smiled when he read it, and then passed it to Brynden and Lucas, who did likewise, Hoster reading it last and being the one who asked the question. "What will we do, father?" Hoster asked as Tytos took to his feet. "We gather our men, and we fight for our kin, for our king, for the dragons," he said loudly. Jason Mallister. Ignoring the raven from Edmure was easy. The man had constantly belittled him, and he cared not why the man was calling the banners. He'd not rise for him. Though when he found the first story about King's Landing and what had happened, It gave him pause. He and Patrick soon finding themselves arguing over refusing the king or going against a house that had done them good. The letter that arrived telling them the full truth of the events in King's Landing made their mind up, and for the past few days the argument was neutrality or joining with the Lannisters. The one thing stopping them was the odds they faced, and Jason was beginning to think he'd need to go to war on the king's side just to survive. The thought made him sick to his very core, Patrick even more so. "You can't be serious, father. After what he's done, it's an affront to the mother to kill a child in such a way." Patrick said, "Aye, it is. And would that the seven would strike the man down for it, but we both know that's not the way of the world. Robert brings the North, the Vale, the Stormlands, and most of the other houses will rise for him, the Reach more than likely too. The North won't rise against the Lannisters, father. Not only do they benefit more than any, but Sir John is there," Patrick said. His son raised an interesting point. Even were he not a hostage, Sir John would fight on the Lannister side. Would his father fight against his son, even for Robert Baratheon? The Reach, he asked, are as close also. If the Lannisters seek to crown Tommen, would Olenna not go for it? Patrick said, and Jason felt that a good point, though it helped him not. "Then what are we to do? Either way, we're fucked, Patrick," he said when the knock came to the door, his maester walking in holding a scroll in his hand. "Maester?" he asked. "It's most odd, my lord. A raven carrying a scroll from House Targaryen," the maester said, and he found himself shaking his head as he looked at the seal and broke it. "Father," Patrick said, "to all the leal houses who supported my family once, I call you to arms. For 4 and 10 years a liar has sat the throne, a usurper, a monster, who by now you've heard the truth of. A man who laughed at the bodies of babes and their mother, who fought based on a lie he knew the truth of. My mother was never kidnapped. Those of you who knew my father have always known this to be true. They were married under the old gods and the new, and despite knowing of this, the usurper lied and my family suffered because of it. They suffered so horrifically that my uncle, the king's best friend and brother by choice, couldn't accept it, and out of fear for my safety, perpetrated his own lie. So the true-born son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen became a bastard called Jon Snow. Today the bastard died. My lords, the bastard died and my father's son takes his place. I call for you to once more to raise your arms, to once more remove a monster from his throne, and to renew your fealty to my house. Jaehaerys Targaryen." After reading it out, he looked to Patrick, who had a smile on his face. One he was sharing. The game had just changed, and the odds were very much different. For Jason, though he felt something else, he felt relief that he could do what his heart wished of him, what his faith demanded of him. "Come, Patrick, it seems we're to help crown the one true king," he said as he stood up. "Stormlands, Beric Dondarrion." The raven came and he found himself sitting at dinner that night with Thoros and Ned, knowing what he must do and not liking it one bit. That he and Thoros were so much at odds was nothing new, especially lately. His friend had for some time spoken up about the king and his family, and while Beric agreed with him, he was his king and his brother, his liege lord. Honor has to count for something, he thought. It was when they were gathering the men at Blackhaven that the letter came, and when Thoros showed him it, his first instinct was that it was a lie. No man could do as it said here. But word soon came from other avenues, and he knew then it was true. What the king had done was terrible, and an affront to the gods, and though he tried to keep it from Ned, he found out all the same. "Yet is it not dishonorable to follow such a man?" Ned asked as they ate their dinner at night. "I swore an oath to his house, to the man himself. Would it be honorable for me to break such an oath?" he asked, and Ned looked to Thoros, who stayed silent. "I vow that you shall always have a place by my hearth, and meat and mead at my table, and pledge to ask no service of you that might bring you into dishonor. I swear it by the old gods and the new," Ned said, and Beric almost choked on his wine. "Ned," he said, shaking his head, "no service that might bring you into dishonor, my lord." Ned said as he got up and walked to his room. He saw Thoros smiling, and he found he had no words to speak, finding the next morning to be even worse, as Ned was sullen and unresponsive when they broke their fast. During their spar, the boy seemed angry, and he wanted to talk to him, to tell him how he felt, and yet he could not, instead just allowing him to leave when he did. It was dinner that night that he found the truth out, and found it to be one that he'd never expected. "Ned, I think it's time you told Beric about your uncle," Thoros said. "Thoros," Ned said, shaking his head. "Then I will, for it's time he learned the truth. Come, Beric, we need to talk," Thoros said. The tale he told him was incredible. A hidden prince, no king, the greatest knight the realm had ever known, alive and well. When he spoke of dragons, Beric had waited for the laugh and found none. That the boy was moving to take his throne was only more inevitable, and when he finally got to speak to Ned before he took to his bed, he found himself pacing rather than sleeping for the rest of the night. "A good knight, to be as my uncle is. That's all I wished for. When I found out he lived and who he served, he didn't need to swear me to secrecy, my lord. I did so without being asked. I cannot fight against my family, and I will not fight against the king he serves," Ned said as he looked pleadingly at him. "Ned, I'll ready my things. My lord, I must return to Starfall. The right thing to do was an easy thing if you were lucky, that was, but life didn't work that way, and after a night with barely any sleep, the morning proved just as taxing. The raven arrived, calling them to arms, though this one bearing a 3-headed dragon seal, and he knew not what to do. "I'll be leaving with Ned, old friend. I wish you good fortune in the wars to come," Thoros said when he told him that he too needed to stick to his oaths. "Thoros," he said, but his friend had already left the room. He stood at the window and looked out, watching as his men readied and as Thoros and Ned made their own preparations. Reaching into his pocket, he took out the small picture of his betrothed, Illyria, looking back up at him, and he knew what must be done. Racing down, he caught them before they left through the gate, his breath taking some time to come back to normal. "We ride to the king, the true king," he said. And the smile on his squire and his friend's face made his own appear. Selwyn Tarth. Each day he waited for the raven, for the letter to come, for any sign to tell him what to do. His liege lord called, and he knew he should rise, and so he did, despite it being against a house he had no issue with, and for a reason he didn't agree with. Yet that wasn't his concern. It was that his daughter was warding at Casterly Rock, and he feared she'd be used as a hostage to make him lay down his arms. As more and more news came from King's Landing and little from Casterly Rock, he found that he was even less sure he wished to raise arms anyway. What had been done was horrific, and bore far too many marks of the Mad King for his liking, so Selwyn had his men take their time and delay their departure until finally the ravens came. "My lord," his maester said, handing him the 2 raven scrolls, one bearing his own seal, the sun's and crescent moon, the other bearing the seal of House Targaryen, which gave him pause. Breaking the seal and hoping it was his daughter's own words, he read. He was happy to see her handwriting, happier still to see she didn't use the code they'd agreed upon many years earlier. While not a rich house, she was his only child and his heir, and so she could be ransomed off, something he'd made her well aware of. So he'd asked her to mark her words with her name signed as just a letter. If she did so, then he'd know she had written under duress. Seeing her name written clearly, Selwyn breathed a sigh of relief. "Father, I am safe and well, and am where I wish to be. I ask you to consider the offer in the other scroll, but I wish you to know that I am in no danger, and my safety should not be your concern. Your loving daughter, Brienne." He quickly opened the second scroll. "Lord Selwyn, I beg your forgiveness for the lie I had to tell you. I did so because my life would be in danger were it to have come out before I was ready. I also wish you to know that no matter your response, Brienne is my friend, her safety and freedom. I guarantee, I swear this on the old gods and the new. My name is not Jon Snow, and I'm not a bastard. My lord, I'm the true-born son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen, and the truth of what happened in the rebellion is soon to be known. Once again, a monster sits the throne. My lord, once again he must be removed, though even were this not true, I'd still have mine own reason why I'd seek it done. I give you leave to join your liege if you feel it the right thing to do. I welcome you to join me if that's your choice, and should you wish to play no part, I'll accept this, my lord. You have my word that I'll not seek retribution against you, nor seek it against Brienne, no matter what choice you make. I wish you good fortune, my lord, Jaehaerys Targaryen. He looked at the scroll and at his daughter's one, remembering the way she looked when she got the raven inviting her to Casterly Rock, how she'd been treated since she'd been there. He'd been promised that she'd be treated fair, and that no one would ever look down on her. Now by the same boy he'd been promised her safety was assured. Looking out at his men, he wondered what the right choice to make was, something days later he still hadn't managed to decide. King's Landing, 297 AC. Robert Baratheon. He was beginning to feel the difference. Though still out of breath and unable to last as long, he was getting better. Placing the hammer down, he grabbed a jug of water and drank straight from it before walking back to begin once more. The two guards coming towards him, and though it took some time, he dispatched them both. It had been to his everlasting shame that he'd not been able to lift his hammer. Not being able to lift it, never mind, swing at something he never thought possible. He was the demon of the trident, and he could not lift that which had won his crown. So he had started out with smaller, lighter hammers, and then found that he had another problem. It had been far too long since he fought, and he was in no condition to do so. Men he'd have laughed at were now too fast and agile for him. The drink had gone first, and then the food, Robert eating much sparser fare than he was used to. He began doing more work, and soon he was beating guards, even if they were the weakest of them, soon beating more and moving up to a stronger, heavier hammer. That he was also fucking better was just an added bonus, Robert finding himself lasting longer and enjoying it more, appreciating the women he fucked and the differences in them a little more. Author, my king, the small council meeting, Lomas said, and he handed off the hammer and nodded as they walked. He found himself overjoyed with the news that Ned had answered the call and looking forward to rubbing it in Jon's face. The meeting itself, though, was as annoying as they ever were. The fucking Tyrells once again causing him to lose his temper. With a girl not so fucking pretty, he'd have denied them still. But Jon was right. He needed an heir, and better a pretty young wife than any other. He continued sparring in the mornings and soon found himself even able to mount his horse alone, something he was glad of as he wondered what his bannermen would make of him needing help. Ordering his armor from the Cahoric and a hammer to be made to look as close to his own as possible, he began to spend his evenings looking over maps, even forgoing time with the horse to do so. Not that he didn't enjoy himself when he was done. "My king, do you wish me to?" the girl said as she moved to go under the table. "No, grab some wine and you and your friend go play. I'll be in presently," he said as he stared at the map. When the Reach came on board, he'd send their forces west, ask Stannis and Renly to join them. He'd march north and meet up with Jon and Ed Newer's men before meeting Ned. His fingers pointed at River Run, and he felt that was best, though for a moment he worried about Ned and his former wife, smiling at the thoughts that soon it wouldn't just be his brother by choice that was laying down with a new wife. Tracing the map, he looked to Golden Tooth and Ashmark, to the Crag and Lannisport, and finally Casterly Rock itself. His army coming from east to west, and Stannis and the Tyrells coming from the south. The Lions would be fucked. And he smiled at that, turning to look to Duskendale. The Golden Company would be at his back, and while Illyrio was a man he knew he could trust, his army was not, and so he'd make them march with him. Moving from the map, he was smiling until he saw it. The sea is where he was weak and the Lannisters strong. He needed the Red Wine Fleet, and he wondered if he should send Stannis with them, finding himself sitting down and redoing his plans once more. He was tired when he walked into his bedchambers, the girls sitting up and waiting for him, and when he saw their naked bodies, he felt himself rise. "My king looks so worried. Perhaps we can make it better." The girl said, her brown eyes and hair briefly reminding him of Lyanna, and yet as she dropped to her knees, it was Marjorie Tyrell he saw when he closed his eyes. "Come, my golden rose, please your king." he said as he lifted her up and threw her giggling onto the bed. After the girls left the next morning and he broke his fast, he began to get prepared for the day to come. Each day he was getting stronger, and he knew he'd not be able to hold back any longer. The time was coming for him to make his move. He called for Gorman and had him send the raven to Stannis and to Renly. His brothers were needed to play their part. Renly would rule while he led the Stormlords, and Stannis would join with the Red Wine fleet and see the Lannister were no threat. He sent the raven to Ned asking for the Manderleys to bring their own ships to bear, and then met with Illyrio to tell him his plans for the Golden Company. By the time he finished his meal and was heading back to his room, he'd felt he'd not worked so much since he'd been crowned. Though preparing for war was far different than sitting the throne, he relished it, enjoyed it, looked forward to it, rather than endured it like he did the ruling itself. "My king, shall we begin?" the blonde said, and he smiled, eager to take out his frustrations on her tight little body. "We shall," he said when he saw the second girl, though he never got the chance to move before he heard the pounding on his door. "Your Grace, your Grace," Gorman said as he almost burst into the room. The man's face panicked and Robert found his anger rise. "The fucking Tyrells," he thought as he grabbed the man by the chain. "What has that cunt done?" he shouted. And then he saw red, or to be more precise, red and black. "What the fuck is this?" "A raven, your Grace. A raven bearing House Targaryen sigil." He almost ripped it from the man's hand and began to read it, each word forcing him to have to struggle to read on before he exploded. "To the usurper, the kinslayer, the false king, Robert Baratheon. The shame of his house. Your reign is soon to end, usurper. The justice you've managed to avoid seeks you out. The mistake you made was you left me alive, and now this dragon rises and comes for you. The lies you spread about my father will not be forgiven. The lies you spoke about my mother no longer believed. For the family you stole from me. For the throne you sit that was never yours. For the life that should have been mine, my brothers, my sisters, for my mother and father. Today you killed the boy usurper. Jon Snow exists no more. In his place I stand as my father's vengeance, as my mother's justice. Rhaegar's son, Lyanna's son, and to you I make this vow. Night gathers, and now my march begins. It shall not end until your death. I shall take a wife, hold all lands, father many children. I shall wear my ancestors' crown and win back my family's glory. I shall live and die where I was born to, on Aegon's throne. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher from the shadows. I am the fire that burns the unjust, the light that brings the truth, the horn that wakes the leal men, the shield that guards the realms of men. I pledge this on my life and on my honor, for this night and all the nights to come. Sleep well, usurper. Sleep well while you can, but be wary, for the night is dark and full of terrors, and when morning comes, the fall of the stag begins. Jaehaerys Targaryen, the true king. The shout had the girls moving as quickly as they could, though they couldn't escape his rage. Robert lashing out at the shapes in front of him and trying to grab the nearest one. The room was red, and then he wasn't there anymore. He was watching as she cried when the harp was played, when she told him she loved another. Robert was sitting in the crowd as she was crowned and in the tent as he read the letter. He was swinging his hammer, but the man wasn't there, and the one who faced him was far too fast. The rubies on his armor and the shine were the same, but the dark hair and gray eyes belonged to someone else. Finding himself sitting in the stands as a young boy won a duel, and he cheered loudly as the floppy fish fell to the ground while he held his breath. "My boy, our boy, he should have been mine, my son." He remembered the thoughts as the melee was won, as the joust and the fight against the Kingslayer had cost him coin. "My boy, our son?" he thought, as he screamed when he saw the boy with his mother, with his father, her dark hair and smiling face, his silver hair and black and red clothing. The boy, small, as they swung him between their arms. "Dragon spawn," he shouted, and for all he knew, the entire realm heard his voice as he raged through the night. She readied herself for the conversation to come, sitting in her room, and wondering if there was any other way to do this. When Jon had told her that he wanted to be there with her when she did it, Jenna had almost hugged the boy. He had so much to do, so many preparations to make, and yet for this, he was willing to take as much time as needed. Tommen would welcome his presence. She knew that. Her nephew saw Jon as who he wished to be. Ironic, she thought, since at one point, the may have ended up as king himself. For Jenna, though she knew that this conversation wouldn't go like the last, that telling a boy he was no longer a prince, that his father wasn't his father, that was easy compared to telling him that his mother was dead. Tommen hadn't mourned Joffrey, nor the life he'd had before or thought he was living now. In some ways, her nephew had welcomed it, but then she knew if she asked her boys if they wished to be a prince or a knight, then Walder and Tion would say the same thing. She closed her eyes briefly when she heard the knock on the door, and then got up and walked to it, opening it to find Jon and Tommen standing outside. "Aunt Jenna, Sir Jon says you wish to speak to me," Tommen said. "King Jaehaerys, Tommen," she said, and the boy blushed and stumbled over saying it, Jon reaching out to place a hand onto his shoulder. "I'm Sir Tommen's knight, and he is my squire," Jon said. And she smiled when Tommen did, though hers was nowhere near as true as his. "Come in and take a seat, Tommen," she said and nodded while looking to Jon, who walked in and sat down beside him, the young boy looking to her and Jon moving closer towards him. "Tommen, we've sent the ship to bring Myrcella back. She'll be here within the week." "Tommen," Jon said. And though she'd agreed that this would be how they did it, she wondered now if they should have saved that for last. "She's not been hurt, has she?" her nephew asked softly. "No, Tommen, she hasn't, but Tommen, your mother." She began and she couldn't. The tears came and she just couldn't. "Aunt Jenna?" Tommen said, and blessed the gods for making him do so. But feeling his arms hold her as he tried to offer comfort to her, shamed her a little. "Tommen, come sit with me," Jon said as she tried to compose herself. "But," Tommen said, and she nodded to him while she walked to get a handkerchief to wipe her eyes, knowing that it was a pointless exercise, as soon she'd be crying again. "Tommen," Jon said a little more firmly. Tommen did what he asked, and as she was coming back from wiping her eyes, she saw how close Jon sat, the concern clear in his eyes as he spoke to her nephew. "Tommen, we received some terrible news from King's Landing. News I wish I could keep from you. News about your mother." "Jon," said his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir Jon, is she—" "Did he hurt her?" Tommen asked worriedly. "Tommen, your mother is, she is. Tommen, she's dead," Jon said, and how he managed to make it through the sentence he didn't know, glad though that he had. "No, she can't be, he wouldn't, Sir Jon. Please, Sir Jon," Tommen said, and then his voice was muffled as Jon grabbed him and pulled him to him, Jenna watching as her nephew sobbed against Jon's chest. How long they stayed that way she couldn't tell. Tommen cried himself out so much that he actually fell asleep in Jon's arms. She watched as Jon lifted him from the ground and moved to the door, her nephew cradled against him, Jon looking to her and whispering he'd be back later to speak to her before walking from the room. Once he'd gone, she moved to her table and poured herself a glass of wine and drank it down in one swallow, refilling the glass and drinking that one a little slower. She resolved to get very drunk this night, to dull the pain and heartache she felt in her chest. She mourned her niece, mourned the girl Cersei had been, the girl she sometimes saw when she looked at Joy, though only in looks and not temperament. Still, she mourned her. Someone had to. They had to remember Joanna's daughter and not what she had become, not Tywin's child. Just thinking of her brother made her grip the glass tight in her anger. He'd turned Cersei into the woman she had been, and she cursed him for it. She mourned the possibilities that had lain before her niece's feet, the roads not taken, and she tried not to think of the one she had. Kevin too mourned, as did Jaime and Tyrion in their own way. With Jerian she couldn't tell. All of them, though, mourned her for the children, for Myrcella and Tommen, her niece and nephew, grandniece and nephew by right, but to her, they were her niece and nephew, and that's how she thought of them. The same way she saw Martin and Willem, Lance and Janie, the same way she thought of Joy. She was sitting there drinking when the door opened, and as she turned to shout at Emmon to leave her alone, she heard John's voice. "Lady Jenna," he said softly, and she wondered, had he knocked, remembering now a sound she had thought was in her head. "Tommen," she asked worriedly. "He's asleep. I left Ghost with him," Garn said. "How is he, John?" "Tired, hurt, angry. He's as he should be, Jenna. I'll speak to him on the morrow. Talk to him about my mother," Garn said. "John, you don't have to." "No, I do. Tyrion, too. He needs to be around people who've gone through it. Do you know if Daven is coming with him when Geryon returns?" "I think so. Geryon said he wanted him here for when Marcella arrives, that they need to know the truth," she said, moving the glass from her hand, having no more wish to drink its contents. "I think we need to tell him, Jenna, Tommen, we need to tell him that his father lives, that he's coming. He needs something. He needs to know he's not alone." "He's not alone," she said angrily. "I know that, guys. I didn't mean. Dad, it's just, I was older than he was when Jamie told me the truth of who I was. When he did, the first thought I had wasn't that I was a prince, a king, or even that my uncle had lied to me. The first thought I had was that I was alone. My mother was gone, my father too. It's not the same, Jenna. Knowing that you have a family, and I knew I had one, all of you had made that clear," John said, and she smiled when he looked at her. "But you missed your parents?" she asked, and he nodded. "We'll tell him on the morrow," she said. He walked over and gave her a hug, and when he looked to the wine glass, she saw him frown, and had it been any other time, she'd have felt affronted, though now she kissed his cheek and bid him good night. "John, don't bring him with you," she said softly. "I'll leave it to him, Jenna. He needs to make the choice. He'll be as safe with us as he would here." "I met his father, John. Don't bring Daven with you, no matter what he says." I won't." King's Landing 29/7 AC. AC, Richard. From the moment he'd set up this venture, this network, this had been what it had been leading to. Gathering information was important, and he and his lips had spread wide and far, and even the spider's web paled in comparison to the work he'd done. Now, though it was time to spread information and not gather it, and Richard found himself looking forward to this even more, it started in Flea Bottom. The tale of the hidden prince, the son of the dragon who was coming back to take his father's throne from the usurping stag and duplicitous falcon. Of how he'd hidden at first and then how he'd come from the shadows because he saw how the people, his people, suffered. How he couldn't sit by and watch as children were left cold and hungry, as their mothers had to suffer to put food on their table. Then it had developed into how he was coming now for the murdering stag, for the monster on the throne, that Robert's rage could only be answered by a dragon's justice. Our truth. The bards and minstrels sang the songs, spoke the tale, and Richard's lips were there behind each and every one of them. For years we suffered here while those on the throne feasted and wasted gold. They cared not whether there was food on my table, nor yours, nor our babes. The hidden dragon cared. The hidden dragon cared so much that he could hide no more. From the shadows and into the light, Jon Snow came, the white wolf, the hidden dragon, Rhaegar's son, the true king. The woman shouted, "The white wolf, the hidden dragon." Richard smiled as his lips did their work and melted back into the shadows himself. He had more to do, and time was of the essence. He knew that in the Vale, the Stormlands, in the Reach, in the North, the Riverlands and the Crownlands, even in Dorne the tales were being spun. It was time to let more tales come into the light. The letters would be delivered to every keep in Westeros. The tale they'd tell were of a truth hidden for many years. While the king had sent his own truth out, Richard's was different. The truth of a lying stag and a falcon who dared fly too high. The tales he spun were of rebellion not for just cause, but for personal gain, not for a lost love, but for jealousy and spite. Some would ignore them, he knew. Some would deny then, and some would believe them wholeheartedly. But they, along with the tales of Robert's rage, would spread, and if even one house or one force refused to answer Robert's call, then all would have been worth it. Make sure the townspeople hear this too. The hidden dragon is not the only song I'd have sung. Make sure they sing of the greedy falcon and the rutting stag. Richard said, and his man smiled as he took the letters and made his way from the house. "My orders, sir?" the bard asked, and Richard smiled, hoping they'd get the chance to carry this one out. "I've set up a few of my lips near the fat man's manse. Go meet with them and see if there is a chance. Don't risk yourself, but if it comes, take it," he said, and Mark nodded. "I'll take my bow, you never know," Mark said. He spoke to the king that night, Jay once again asking if he didn't feel it was time to come from the city, and Richard saying no. "I have more work to do here. My king, I, and my lips are safe. Lomas follows the crumbs I leave for him, and those crumbs alone." "To the brothel?" Jay asked. "Aye. He should be coming to that by week's end," Richard said, smiling as he looked at the glass candle. "What will he find there?" Jay asked. "The truth. The question is, what will he do with it?" Richard said, and there was a pause for a few moments, and he began to worry. The connection had been severed. "You think he may not tell him?" "I think he will, my king. But even if should not, the song will be sung, the mockingbird who fooled a falcon." Richard laughed. "Littlefinger?" Jay asked a moment later. "They sent him to the Reach, my king, seeking a betrothal as our small-winged friend." He laughed as he heard the scoff from Jay. "I wish him good fortune. I'll let Lady Olenna know." Jay said, "Be safe, Sir Richard. Be safe. Keep your lips safe, for our work doesn't end when I take the throne, and I'd have you with me." "You too, my king. Try not to risk too much," he said, and though he welcomed the laugh he got in return, it didn't assuage his worry. They were so close, and it all rested on the shoulders of a young boy. Should anything happen to him then, all was lost. Comforting as it was that he had 5 men guarding his back, not to mention a rather large white wolf, it was the dragon that Richard hoped the king would spend most of his time with. The Martells may have managed to take out a dragon by luck. Robert and John Arryn wouldn't be so fortunate, as Jay wasn't the only dragon that was hidden from them. "Sir Richard, he's gone in," Davis said to him as he watched the brothel. Richard laying on the bed in the room they rented. "How long ago?" he asked. "Only a moment, sir. I called you as soon as I saw him. Hungry?" Davers asked, and Richard welcomed the hot soup, dipping the bread into it as he looked from the window. He asked. "Aye, the man thinks himself you, sir." Davers said with a chuckle as Richard rolled his eyes. Richard actually quite liked Lomas. He was competent enough, a decent enough man who just happened to be serving a terrible king in hand, something that many of his friends and he had also done. True, he had told himself he had served Rhaegar, but Aerys had sat the throne. Shaking that thought from his mind, for now he looked and ate the soup, smiling when after a couple of hours Lomas walked from the brothel ashen-faced. "Let the games begin," he said as he stood up. He had more work to do and a king to see crowned. Dorne 297 AC. AC. Oberyn Martell. He had barely been able to let the raven scroll out of his hand since he got it, finding himself reading it over and over again. "To my family. The time has come to finally retake that which was stolen from us, from my brother, my sister, from their mother. Our family should sit the throne by right, and though I cannot ever hope to replace my brother or sister in your hearts, I can make them proud of me and take their place on their throne. I can do what Elia wished, what she hoped, and see that the rest of those responsible pay for what they took from us. My brother and sister are with me. Rhaenys readies to fly, and Aegon I carry deep in my heart." Elia is with me, the woman who called me her son, and who they stole the chance for me to ever meet. I ask you to be with them, to join me, to rise and see our family rise once again. Soon we're to be even more closely tied. Through Arianne and Tyrion, House Martell and House Targaryen are united once more. Through our shared blood, though I already feel united with my kin, I am not just my father's house, or my mother's. I am as Elia has named me, a son of Dorne. Let us be unbowed, unbent, unbroken, together, and let those who caused us so much pain know the true might of Dorne. J. Harrys Targaryen, son of Dorne. When he had shown his family, they'd been as pleased as he was. Ellaria, even though worried about the war to come, had been proud to see Jay name himself as he did. It took time to call the banners, and during that time Doran was more distant than he had ever been. That he stayed at the Water Gardens rather than come to Sunspear had forced Oberyn to decide to ride and speak to his brother. Though before he got the chance, Arianne and Ellaria asked to speak to him. So he made his way to Arianne's private solar and found her and Sir Daemon inside, along with his paramour. His former squire had taken some time to get used to the fact that Arianne was marrying, that the man she was marrying was Tyrion Lannister, and that his niece loved him, both taking a toll on Daemon. Though he had stuck up for Tyrion when others had tried to run him down and had intervened when Tyrion's man had almost killed Dre Dalt. "Niece, my love," he said, kissing first Arianne and then Ellaria on the cheek. "Uncle, please sit. I find myself in need of counsel," Arianne said. And he noticed she looked upset. "Ari?" he asked, and she shook her head. "The Dark Star, my prince," Sir Daemon said when no one else spoke. "Who cares about a dead man?" he said with a chuckle. "But why is he dead, Oberyn?" Ellaria asked. "Because he messed with my nephew and met the White Wolf," he said, laughing a little more fully as he reached over to the bowl and grabbed some of the grapes. "Uncle, this story, it makes no sense. You know it too," Arianne said. He did, and had it not been for the preparations he needed to make, then he'd have probably looked into it more. The Dark Star was a cunt, and a man who couldn't be trusted. He was also one who did things that at times made no sense. Yet attacking Marjorie Tyrell had been perplexing, even knowing that. The reasons behind it were not something he could make no sense of. What he'd found out was that the Dark Star had traveled to King's Landing to compete in the melee that Jay had won. The next day, he tried to attack Marjorie, only to be met with Jay and Ghost, and that had been the end of Sir Gerald Dane. Arianne had come up with a wild conspiracy theory that he'd dismissed, only for Ellaria to not only agree, but lay it out in a way that made some sense. In fact, had it been any man other than the Dark Star, then, even despite the ludicrous nature of it, Oberyn may have given it some thought. That it was Sir Gerald, though, was where it all broke down. Doran would never seek to use that man, even was he complicit, as they suggested. "I'll not listen to another word against my brother Ari," he said when he realized what was about to come. "Uncle," Arianne said, her voice pleading. "No, you were not there when I handed him Elia's letter. You didn't see him react as a brother would. The questions he asked me, the reasons he gave me for why we support Jay, these were true, and so no, I'll not listen to your wild speculations." He said as he moved to get up. "Sit, my love, there is more you must hear," Ellaria said. He looked at Ellaria, at Daemon, and finally at Arianne, his niece's expression, one he had never seen before and one he wasn't sure about. Taking his seat, he sat back, and it took a few moments for anyone to speak, Ellaria finally deciding that it should be her. "Did you know the Dark Star went to the Water Gardens?" Ellaria asked, and he shook his head. His brother would never allow the man there. Jane told me. She and the Darkstar had been fucking for a moon or so when he received an invitation to the Water Gardens. She said she saw it herself before he burned it. Ariane said, Lady Bright is a fool. That she was fucking the Darkstar is evidence enough of that. He said and saw Ariane nod her head, though he hadn't meant it directed at his niece. She may be uncle, but she's not a liar. Ariane said, She told me this as we drank one night. She mourned him a little. So he went to the Water Gardens. That doesn't mean anything, she said. No, on its own it doesn't, Ariane, Elaria said, looking to her niece. When I told Father that I wished to visit Jay, to see him and Rainey's, he welcomed it, but he also suggested I seduce him, that I try to make him fall for me. Ariane said, He asked you this? No, Uncle, not in so many words. You know what Father is like. He made it clear, though. I cared not, as I wished to see Tyrion again, but... Ariane said, leaving the rest unsaid. So what? You think Doran did what? Tried to have Marjorie Tyrell killed and used the Darkstar to do it? Oberyn said, laughing. Of all the ridiculous things, why isn't he here, Uncle? Why isn't my father here to speak to the bannermen, to call them to arms? Yes, I know you'll lead our armies, and I'll rule here. But for this, you don't find it strange that Father wouldn't wish to be here for this? Ariane said, Enough. Not everything is a conspiracy, Ari. Gods, you really think. Enough, I say. He said, brushing off Ilaria's arm when he walked from the room. He found no comfort in Ilaria's arms that night, no sleep either, not truly. Even when he closed his eyes, they were filled with thoughts of his brother, of Elia and of Jai. He rode hard the next day to the Water Gardens. The banners had been called, and soon the lords would make their choice, though he knew they'd follow him. Seeing the Water Gardens in front of him, he breathed deeply and rode in slowly, dismounting and finding his brother sitting by the pool. Oberyn, Doran said, surprised to see him. Brother, he said, taking a seat. What brings you here, Oberyn? I've come for you, brother. The lords are to arrive, and they need to see their prince. Our nephew has called for us, and I'd have you send Dorne to war. He said, smiling as he looked at his brother. I am unwell, Oberyn. I cannot make the journey. Doran said, Surely for this brother, for Elia, for Aegon, for Rhaenys. He set his eyes on his brother all the time. Not even for them, Oberyn. It pains me deeply that I cannot, truly. But no, not even for them, Doran said. And Oberyn nodded and smiled. I understand, brother. I'll ensure they leave knowing your heart, he said, and Doran smiled as Oberyn patted him on his shoulder before turning and walking from the room. The meeting that night was loud and boisterous, and despite one or two lords asking about Doran's absence, the consensus was quick and easy to reach. They would ride and fight for a son of Dorne, for the man who had helped avenge Elia, Rhaenys, and Aegon. They would see the stag brought low, and as they left to call their men, Oberyn found his mind troubled once more. He didn't drink or celebrate with the others, instead sitting and playing Cyvasse with Nymeria, his daughter making moves which caught even him by surprise. Though truthfully, Oberyn was barely concentrating on the game and just looking at the board instead. After losing for the second time, Nymeria called him out for his distraction, and Oberyn refused the third game. He called for Ariane and Ilaria to meet with him and walked to the solar. Uncle, Ariane asked, I do not know if what you say is true. By the gods, I hope it's not. But we must prepare as if it is, Oberyn said. Oberyn, Ilaria asked. Our children are to be taken from the Water Gardens. I want to force loyal only to us close by should they need to be used. You mean to remove my father? Ariane asked worriedly. I pray I won't need to, but he lied to me today, lied about Elia, and I find myself questioning just how supportive of Jay he truly is. There is a reason he didn't wish to be here, one I cannot see. Games like this are not where my talents lie. We should prepare to remove him if needed, Place him under house arrest and cut off contact with the world if it comes to that, and hope it does not, Oberyn said. You think he did it, don't you? Arianne asked. I hope for his sake he did not. I'm a viper, and I would make any who dared try to harm my love suffer greatly. Imagine what a dragon would do, Ari. He boarded the ship to Weil the next morning, he and his daughters, Ilaria, taking their youngest to Hellholt, while Arianne had Sir Daemon gather up men they could trust. Oberyn had asked the knight to stay, and he had reluctantly agreed, despite wishing to stand by his side in the war to come. Though he had felt it best if he stayed with Arianne, not that she would be in any danger, but so she'd have men loyal to her and not Doran close by. Watching Sunspear fade from view, he walked to his cabin and began to look over battle plans. The Stormlands was Robert's greatest strength along with the Vale. Yet they'd never expect Dorne to attack, and Oberyn felt confident their spears would cause them big problems. Looking at the map, he wondered who among the Marcher lords would turn their cloaks, if any. House Selmy, perhaps. House Dondarrion. If Jay was right, the fight itself may not come for some time. As he lay down in bed, he tried not to think on Doran, and yet found his mind refusing to go anywhere else. If he was right, then he needed to speak to Jay, to speak to him before the truth outed. But if he was wrong, then he was creating a problem where there was none. What to do wasn't going to be resolved this night, and so he tried to sleep. Images of Elia telling him that he knew the truth, that he knew what needed to be done, disturbing his dreams once more. King's Landing, 297 AC. John Aaron. The last 2 days had felt like years as the truth, and what it meant began to hit home. They had gone from a decent position with a high chance of winning to a terrible one, and victory fading, all in a single raven scroll. He'd even sent riders off after Petar, hoping to catch him on the road before he arrived in the Reach. Not only was that avenue closed off to them now, but traveling there was dangerous, and he needed Petar back here. Robert had ranted and raved, broken things. He'd reached for wine only to throw it against the wall, and he cried and blubbered like a newborn babe, all in the space of one night. The next morning, though, had been a shock to him. Seeing him in the yard, the hammer being swung with more power and force than he'd seen it in years, and John had welcomed that. His rage was needed if they were to keep their heads. He hadn't been able to meet with Illyrio yet. The sheer complexities of trying to find out what they now faced had taken up all of his time. The past 2 nights he'd spent looking over maps and working out figures, and it had taken him until this morning to actually use his brain. Calling Gorman in after writing out the Raven Scrolls and telling the man to ensure it was sent to everyone. Everyone, my lord. Everyone. He said, almost shouting. Let the realm know the truth of this bastard. And let Ned Stark's name be spoken for who he truly was, a usurping traitor who sought to place a bastard on the throne, a man with no honor who wished to use even the rape and murder of his sister to further his own ambitions. Lies, all of it. He knew what had been said in the Dragon Scroll to be true. He knew it as he'd spent as much time searching it in his mind as he had trying to plan a way to keep his head. From the moment Ned had brought him into the Red Keep, how he'd not known then. Ned Stark, fathering a bastard. Gods, what fools they'd all been. Why Jaime Lannister had taken him to Squire, and why he'd been able to do all he had. Dragon supporters hidden in the shadows helping him, no doubt. Even his animosity to Edmure and the words he spoke before their duel, all now making far more sense to John. That he'd been played by a mere boy annoyed him until he saw it more clearly. It wasn't the boy who'd played him. It was those who held his strings. The Lannisters and the withered old cunt had found their own puppet king, and he envied them their choice. Though soon they, like he had, would find out that puppets can be difficult to control. He sighed as he looked at the map once more, and then he walked from the room, glad to be heading to a council meeting and wondering if Robert would attend. His Grace? He asked Sir Mandon when he saw him. Inside, my lord, Mandon said, and he walked in to find Lomas and Robert sitting around the way too large table. Gorman no longer welcome in these meetings. Your Grace, he said with a bow. Piss on that, John. Sit and tell me the worst, Robert asked. The Reach, Robert. We'll not bring them on board now, she said. I've offered to make the girl a fucking queen, John, Robert shouted. A girl who already spends far too much time with. He paused, not knowing which name would cause Robert the least aggravation. The fucking Dragonspawn, you're telling me they've been in on this together? Robert said, his face red. I believe so, Robert. They were always close. It's the only thing that makes sense, that they promised her a throne before now. I'll fucking grind them into the ground, every last fucking rose, and then I'll piss all over their fucking bodies, Robert said. The North. Robert, he said, and saw the look on Robert's face that he knew was hard to take for his former foster son. I'll see him dead, John, mark my words. I'll see Ned Stark in the ground before I leave this world. I thought him a brother, fucking traitor, just as bad as his fucking whore of a sister, Robert said, though his anger was quieter and lower now. Your Grace, we have the North, the Reach, and the West against us. If these reports from your brother are true, then the lords of the Narrow Sea haven't answered his call, and I'm hearing troubling whispers from the Riverlands, Lomas said. What about the Riverlands? He asked worriedly. Some houses haven't risen, my lord. Some of the larger ones. I've even heard of houses displaying the dragon banner, Lomas said. I fucking told you we should have driven them into the ground. All of them. Every fucking house which rose for those fuckers should have been removed. You preach leniency. See what it gets us, John. See what it fucking gets us. I'll be lenient no more. By the time I'm done, the Reigns of Castamere will be a fucking children's song, Robert said as he got up to leave. My lord, there is one more thing, something most troubling, Lomas said, and Robert stopped his rant and looked to the Master of Whisperers. Well, out with it then, Robert said. I've been hearing whispers about the Master of Coin. Disturbing whispers that at first I put down to just malicious gossip, but I've been looking into him, my lord. Peter is a good man and true. You have no right to look into him, Lomas, he said angrily. My lord, my purview is anything that affects the crown, and this affects the crown. It makes Lord Baelish untrustworthy. My lord, it calls into question everything he may do, Lomas said. What the fuck did Littlefinger do? Robert said, half angry and half curious. He's been sleeping with Lady Lysa, your grace. He claims the babe is his own, Lomas said. Lies, fucking lies. I'd have noticed if my wife was. He said as Robert laughed. Just like I did, based John. You never cared for her, and how much time did you actually spend with her? Robert said, still smirking. This is a lie. There's no truth to this, he said, shaking his head. There are letters, my lord, and there's a song being sung in taverns, Lomas said, and Robert looked at the Master of Whisperers. A song? The mockingbird who fooled the falcon, Lomas said. I'll fucking gut them both of them, he said, storming from the room. He found her sitting in their chambers breastfeeding Robert, and he saw it clearly. Then, this was not his son. This could not be his son. That she never noticed his anger only proved what the king had said. Not only did he not care for her, but Lysa clearly didn't care for him either. Guards, arrest her, he shouted, and his men came rushing in, grabbing Lysa and dragging Robert from her arms. John, Peter, I fucking know about you and Petter, he shouted, and her eyes told him the truth. John, please, Robin. Throw the two of them in the fucking cells. Make sure to put them in different ones, he said, taking some satisfaction in hearing his wives' screams as they were dragged from the room. He walked over and poured himself a drink and hoped that the men he sent to bring Petter back found him. He needed him found, as he'd now discovered one man he wished to kill even more than Jon Snow. Dragonstone 297 AC. AC. Stannis. He had waited as long as he could, and the bannermen had not come, and then the ravens came. Seeing the seal, he knew he was fucked, and Dragonstone was no longer safe for him and his family. So he called Davos in, and they began to plan what he needed to do, organizing his guard and making the Fury ready, walking around the keep and making sure that all the things he actually cared for were packed and ready to go. He tried not to dwell on the fact he was leaving Dragonstone with his tail between his legs, that he was joining his brother in a fight that not only did he fear they would not win, but the reasons for starting weren't ones he agreed with. Instead, it was as always duty that came first. The fleet would sail to King's Landing ready to be used. How the king wished he and his family too would head there, though it was Storm's End he wished to send them to. "You are sure, my lord, I could take them to Storm's End if you wish?" Davos asked. "No, Sir Davos. I need to see them safe myself, and I must go to King's Landing. The Fury will set out with the household, and with Mummers, while Selyse, Shireen, and I will travel on the Black Betha with you." "You really think the Lords of the Narrow Sea will try to take you?" Davos asked. "A dragon comes for us all, Davos. Those who follow will seek to fly too," he said. And Davos nodded and turned to leave him alone with his thoughts, knowing they were coming and that Robert would need him. As much as he'd have needed the men he'd bring, Stannis vowed he wouldn't be besieged again. He was his brother's heir, and there was no place for him to hide. Robert had seen to that, and he knew that when this war was done, he'd be alive, or he and all his family would be no more. Standing in the chamber of the painted table, he looked down at the map and began to see battles play out. The Reach, the West, the North, the Lords of the Narrow Sea, Loyalist houses and Robert's rage, all of it combining to put them at a huge disadvantage. Stannis, though, knew one thing. Men wouldn't win this war. Commanders would. He'd faced greater odds and seen victory before. The Iron Fleet had ruled the seas and he'd beaten them, not because he had more ships, but because he had the will to see it done. "May my will not fail me in the days to come," he said as he tumbled the stag over to its side. Dragonstone would belong to the dragons once more. He ate that night and actually enjoyed his food. Shireen was excited to be leaving, even though she loved Dragonstone, excited to be traveling to King's Landing and to do so on Davos's ship. It shamed him somewhat that it would be the first time he brought her there, the first time he brought her anywhere, truth be told. Still, he enjoyed seeing her this way, even reaching out to touch her hand and trying to smile at her and his wife. "We leave under cover of night, before the dawn," he said, and Selyse and Shireen both nodded. "To King's Landing, father?" Shireen asked. "Aye, to King's Landing," she said. The Fury and the rest of their ships left early that night, Stannis, Shireen, and Selyse being smuggled out into a small hut where they waited. 3 knocks came to the door, and he opened it to see Sir Davos standing there waiting, and they hurried to the beach, the rowboat quickly taking them to the Black Betha. Quicker even than the Fury, the Black Betha took sail, and by the time they woke, Dragonstone was far behind them. "My lord," Davos said, handing him the Mirish eye, and he looked to see the ships on Driftmark and knew he'd managed to leave in time. "A Lannister ship?" he said, handing the far eye back to Davos. "Aye, it seems you were right, my lord," Davos said, though Stannis took no comfort in it. "Aye," he said, walking away. He spent the next few days looking over maps, writing down figures and wondering whether there was any point to anything he was doing. Best case, they were down 2-1, and worse didn't bear thinking of. Their only hope would be to force the attack where they wished it to be, and he didn't know if he could do that, or if that was even possible. When they saw King's Landing in the distance, he welcomed the sight, though he didn't look forward to being berated by his brother. Not that this one would go how Robert imagined, Stannis having his own words for his brother. Arriving at the Red Keep, he made sure Celice and Shireen were settled before heading to speak to his brother, finding him John Aaron, Lomas, and to his surprise, Renly all waiting for him. "Ran away, did you, brother? That's not like you," Robert said mockingly. "I figured for the war to come it'd be better if I were by your side than stuck besieged in my keep," she said. "They rose against you?" John asked, not needing to say who. "They were about to," he said before turning to Robert. "Gods! What were you thinking, all of them, Robert? Have you heard what people are calling it Robert's Rage? You've turned half the realm against us, and that's not counting the ones the dragon has on his side." "Fuck them all. They think that was rage. They'll soon see fucking rage," Robert said. "What are our plans? You're to go to Storm's End. Renly has called the banners and they rally. Sir Eldon holds command for now, but they need a Baratheon to lead them, and lead them you will, brother," Robert said. "What of you?" he asked Renly, his tone sharp. "I'm to rule, brother, to hold King's Landing in our brother's name," Renly said with a smile. "Robert, I march. John and I march. John heads to meet the Knights of the Vale, and I and the Crownland banners travel to Duskendale," Robert said, confusing him. "Duskendale? The Golden Company are to land there. You think the Dragonspawn the only one with surprises up his sleeve?" Robert said, laughing. "The seas, Robert?" he asked, and was surprised when Robert didn't stop laughing. "John?" he asked, turning to the Falcon Lord. "We've sent an offer to the Greyjoys. Reeve to your heart's content, for the royal fleet is stood down," John said, as Stannis shook his head and looked at his brother in disgust. They ate as a family that night, well as close to a family as they ever were. Robert was charming and had Shireen laughing while Renly sat with that annoying smirk of his on his face. He noticed that his brother didn't drink and ate sparingly, and then looking more closely at him, he noticed that he'd lost some weight. He seemed firmer to him, and it was something he saw more clearly at sparring the next day. "He's been doing this a lot?" he asked Lomas. "Each day, my lord, each day," Lomas said. He and most of the fleet set out for Storm's End the next day, Shireen and Celice by his side. His daughter had hoped to see more of the city, but Stannis wouldn't leave her in Renly's care. Storm's End had survived dragons once before, and Renly said the stores could last 2 years. Surely it'd be done by then, he thought. Though as they sailed and he looked at his daughter, he couldn't help but feel that once again he was on the wrong side, and he worried if this time he'd pay for it. King's Landing 29-7 AC. AC. Illyrio. There had been rare moments of panic in Illyrio's life. When Sarah fell ill, he had panicked, and though there was nothing he could have done to save her, he still blamed not being clear in what he wished done as being a factor in her death. When Varys's reports had stopped coming, he had panicked briefly only to be able to right himself quickly. The letter from John Connington about Aegon had perhaps been his worst ever. Until now, that was. How had this happened? How had he not been aware of this? Had Varys kept it from him? How? The questions all fought each other in his head. No sooner had one popped up than another took its place, each of them leaving with either no answer or with the lack of a decent one. He had met the boy, and he was as far from a Targaryen as you could possibly be in looks, not in blood. A voice in his head said, and he tried to ignore it. To say this fucked up his plans was an understatement, and when the panic receded, it was soon replaced by anger. Though soon that too had gone and worry was in its place, he didn't know what to do. That much was clear. He had no idea what he could do. So he did what he usually did when he couldn't make his mind up. He ate, and he ate a lot, gorging himself on many dishes and then burying himself in as many of his slaves as he could, all trying to clear his troubled mind. "Magister, another note for him, Lord Aaron," one of the servants said. "Yo." "Fine. "Tell Afawadar I wish to see him," he said, dressing and reading the note, another request for a meeting, and he knew he'd have to answer that one soon. "You wish to see me, Magister," Afawadar said, sitting down. "Ooh!" "I did. I have a job for you. I need you to take ship to Bravos. You're to pay a visit to the House of Black and White," he said, and saw the men pale. "Bail, Magister. Hand them this note. 2,000,000. You can go to 2,000,000 if they'll see it done," he said, and the Afawadar nodded. He wondered if the amount was enough to kill a man, yes, to kill a dragon he didn't know. The House of Black and White was quite particular in which jobs they accepted, and their costs reflected that. The Golden Company couldn't be turned back, he knew that. As much as he may have wished to stop them, they were coming, and the war would happen. That it was a far different war than he imagined couldn't be helped. The outcome was all that mattered. Later that day he met with Jon Arryn and the king, and while it annoyed him, it did present an opportunity, and so he went with it. Even accepting the lies they told him about the odds they'd face, the North would never rise against them. Robert said, "The Reach would come on board," Jon added. Did they really think him this foolish, he wondered? Had he not seen the boy with the rose? Had he not crowned her queen once already? As for the North, Illyrio had spent his whole life planning to make his son king, was spending his entire fortune to see Aegon crowned. Varys had been his best friend, and yet Illyrio would have taken his knife and plunged it into the man's chest if it needed to be done to see Aegon get his birthright. The North would rise for Jon Snow, for Jaehaerys Targaryen, he thought as he spat. "Magister, are you sure about this?" his steward said, and he nodded as the man readied his things. "I am. We must travel with the king," she said. "As you say, Magister, all will be ready within a day. And good." He walked to the window and looked over the manse's gardens once more. He had intended to make this his base until Aegon took the throne, to sit here and wait for his son to come. The world Aegon was arriving to had changed so dramatically, though, that he had no choice but to change his plans. The Golden Company's orders, the king wishing to see them, the truth of who the king actually had on his side. He needed to be there to do what needed to be done himself, and he felt a little shudder down his spine at the thoughts. Illyrio had planned this war out, planned to put his black dragon on the throne, and had thought he'd taken care of the red ones, only to find that he wasn't the only one who had a hidden dragon ready to be revealed, and as he looked out on the world beyond the window, he began to worry about that. Aegon's story was always going to be their biggest selling point, who he was, who they claimed him to be. A great story could move the world, and they had the best of all. Now, though their story would seem like a poor imitation of another, that Jon Snow was known to the people of Westeros, that he'd made a name for himself already, only added to the problems. If he managed to tie up the houses that Illyrio feared he already had, then even more so, who would come to their side? No one while the boy lived, and so he had to die, be it on the field at Robert Baratheon's hands, which was doubtful enough, at Aegon's hands, which would cause its own problems unless the narrative was changed, or at the hands of a faceless man. Jon Snow had to die. "He will die," Illyrio said, turning as he walked to his bedside table and picked up the box, Sarah's hands inside it. "He will die, my love." The Reach 297 AC. Littlefinger. He hated riding on a horse, hated it, far preferred to travel in comfort in a carriage or wheelhouse. The way the king had looked at him when he'd asked his man to ready his, though made it clear that it would not be appreciated for him to dally. So instead of traveling in comfort like the civilized man he was, Petter had been forced to travel like a savage. Each night he had climbed down off his horse and had felt the pains and aches in his body. Sleeping in the open didn't help either. This was not the life he was to live. Soft sheets and a feather bed with his love beside him, that was what he was owed by this world. Settling down for the night, he began to dream of her once more, just like he did each and every night. blue eyes looking down on his as her hair moved from side to side, feeling every inch of himself inside her as she rode him, hearing her voice as she called out his name. "My lord?" One of his guards said, waking him from the pleasant dream. "What? Why are you waking me?" he asked angrily as he looked to the darkness of the night. "My lord, you sounded disturbed. You were calling for someone." The guard said. "Did you hear a name?" he asked worriedly. "No, my lord." "Whoa. I'm well. Just a bad dream. Don't wake me again," he said both angrily and relieved that he'd not given away too much of himself. That was one of his biggest fears, that somehow, in some way, he'd give away too much of his desires, his true dreams. Luckily, he was surrounded by stupid men who thought themselves masters of the game like John Aaron, or drunks who cared not, like the king. Yet what he desired the most had been so close and had almost cost him everything. So happy had he been to see her that his mask had slipped and Lysa had noticed. It had forced him to be careful. More than that, it had forced him to hurt her, and for that, he'd make sure Lysa would pay dearly. How he had not just grabbed her and ran straight to the sept when she had all but asked him to marry her was beyond him. Only that his instinct for survival had kicked in, and he, though overjoyed, he knew he couldn't do what his heart so longed for. Not yet. "I've seen how you look at her, just like you did when we were children," Lysa said as she combed her hair. "She is a friend, and yes, I'll admit when I was a boy I had a silly crush on her. But I'm a man now. Lysa and I have a man's needs. It's you who I need, who I've always truly wanted," he said, kissing her cheek and trying not to let the smile on her face annoy him more than it already did. "Good, because I'll not share you better. Not with her, not with anyone," she said, looking to him, though her look was one which took him aback. "Nor I you, my love," he said, and was happy to see the smile return, though not the face it was on. It had forced him to be careful, to think out each move, and to realize that he couldn't hide how he felt from Lysa. She watched him far too closely, so he tried not to be near Cat. He'd hidden from her like a scared little boy, and it had taken a toll on his heart. To be denied that which was owed to you was nothing new to him, but to have the chance of it, to be able to reach out and touch it, but not. That had been hard. Only made harder by the offer she had made him, and he hoped that soon he could do as his heart desired. Breaking their fast, they mounted up, and he felt the pain in his arse as he moved on the saddle. Just riding for a few hours made him almost ready to collapse, and so when he saw the village up ahead, he cared not about the hurried nature of his mission. They would stop here and he'd sleep in a bed tonight. After having a warm bath which relieved his weary bones, he and his guards walked down to eat in the tavern, finding the place full and the meal to be a good one. "You very full this night?" one of his guards said to a serving girl. "Aye, we're celebrating," the girl said as Peter tuned her out. "Celebrating? I like to celebrate," the guard said, smiling at the girl, who smiled back at him. "Well, you'll enjoy the night here then. The dragons are back," the girl said, walking away, and Peter shook his head, thinking he'd misheard it. When the bard came, though he found out he hadn't as the songs began to play, the hidden dragon began to be sung, and as the room cheered, Peter listened in horror. More so when the next song started, hoping his ears deceived him as the bard called this one, "The Greedy Falcon and the Rutting Stag." The words of each made it clear what happened, and yet Peter had to be certain. So he invited the bard to sit with them and bought the man a drink. "Interesting songs. I've not heard them before," Peter said, and the man nodded. "Aye, they're new to me too. A man came into the night and began to sing them. Then he told us all the tale. Word came soon after that the banners are rising for the hidden dragon." The bard said, swallowing his ale. "The tale?" he asked as he ordered the man another drink. He rode hard that night. Though his direction had changed, and even sore as he was, he rose early and rode hard the next day too. By the time he reached Tumbleton, it was clear he had been right to do so. The dragon banner waved high above Housefootly's seat, and only for the fact that he wished to know more, he'd have ridden past. Instead, though they rode into the village and into the nearest tavern, his men enjoying the drink and food, and Peter listening to the talk around him. The songs were the same, and he knew then how much trouble they were in. Jon Snow wasn't a bastard wolf, not a deep, dark stain that had shamed his beloved. He was a dragon, and this dragon was readying for war. As he sat there, his mind raced as he worked it out. The West he had, the Reach, too more than likely, the marriage he could offer far more attractive than the one Petter had been bringing them. The North, too, would rise for Jon Snow, which left them with... what? The Riverlands would split, and he cursed himself for his part in that. The Vale would rise for Robert as with the Stormlords. With the Golden Company, it gave them a chance, but he cared not for the odds. He drummed his fingers on the table as he tried to figure out the best advantage. For him here, he could turn his cloak. But what did he have to offer? Nothing, which was why he turned back, knowing that Olenna would have seen him lose his head if he brought nothing to the table. As he was thinking, he heard it, and it caused him to panic, to actually, for the first time since he stood facing Brandon Stark, panic and almost wet himself. "What's that song?" he said, his voice almost screeching. "Oh, that! The mockingbird who fooled a falcon," the girl said, laughing as she danced away. He sat there and listened, and knew just how fucked he was. He couldn't go west if he did. Olenna would have his head. East now was out of the question, too. Jon Arryn must know the truth by now if they were singing it so openly. What to do? Where to go? How to keep his head? The thoughts were jumbled, and he needed to be elsewhere. Paying the coin and telling his guards to mount up, he rode slowly from the town, the cool night breeze and the quiet giving him time to think. "My lord?" One of his guards said after they'd gone a mile or two at walking pace. "We head for Riverrun," he said as he turned his horse north, the plan clear in his head now, and he only hoped she'd not heard the mockingbird tale yet, that he could frame it his way first. Casterly Rock, 297 AC. J. Harry's Targaryen. Bringing the Wester Lords on board had been easy and yet not. The initial excitement over declaring for him had soon developed into questions of what they would face, who their allies would be, and what their battle plans were. Speaking to Jaime and Tyrion, he knew also that he had things to do that couldn't be put off any longer. With the addition of Loras and the wearing of the white cloaks, he now had a true Kingsguard, and as Jaime said it, needed a Lord Commander. At one point that would have been Jaime. Though he was far happier that he was in the role he was in now, he had needed his advice more and more the past few days. Tyrion, too, had become more involved, and had brought up things that he'd not even thought of, and Jay knew they too needed to be handled. This, though, would be his first official act as king, and as he sat in his solar, Jaime having insisted he needed one, he waited for the man to come in. "Sir Barristan, please sit," he said when Barristan walked in the door. "What?" "Your Grace," Barristan said, and yet didn't take a seat, making Jay smirk. "Please, sir, humor me," he said, and the bold smiled as he took his seat. "You wished to see me, Your Grace," Barristan said. "I did, sir. I've had a Kingsguard by my side for almost 9 years. Sir, Lord Jaime, Jors, Walder, Arthur, yourself, and now Loras. I even had one who paid the ultimate price, Sir Lears," he said, his voice soft, as he thought back on his first protector. "Aye, Sir Jors speaks of him often, Your Grace. He was a good man, sir, good and true, and I miss him greatly. As I said, I've had a Kingsguard since the moment Lord Jaime took me from Winterfell. To some, I've been a king from that moment, but there is a difference between then and now," he said, looking to the night. "Now you must act the king." Barristan said, and Jay nodded. "Sir Barristan, I would name you Lord Commander of my Kingsguard," Jay said, standing up, which Barristan did almost immediately. "Your Grace, Sir Arthur," Barristan said. "Even were it not your rightful place, Sir Barristan, based on your service, It's the place that Sir Arthur feels best suited to you. You are my choice. Sir, do you accept?" "With great honor and humility, my king," Barristan said. "From now on, I'll leave all matters regarding the Kingsguard to you, sir. There in time will be changes, but they'll be discussed between us. Go, I believe your brothers await you," he said, and Barristan turned and looked back at him as if to say something before turning back and leaving the room. Later that day, he walked to his first war meeting, and he could tell the lords wondered why it was being held in the vaults. The room they'd cleared was large, and it had needed to be as most of the lords of the West had come, and he intended to tell them many truths this day. Behind him, Sir Arthur and Sir Jorah walked, Sir Barristan waiting inside the room, along with Jaime and Tyrion. "My lords, please sit. We've much to discuss," he said as he walked into the room, looking around to see Lord Brax and then Lord Craighall looking to him eagerly. "Your Grace," Jaime said, and Jay tried not to chuckle. Barely anyone called him his name in public anymore. "My lords, before we begin to discuss direct battle plans, my hand has an announcement to make about the makeup of our war council," he said, and Jaime stood up. "Lord Titus Brax, Lord Roland Craighall, Lord Damon Marbrand, and myself, His Grace and Sir Barristan Selmy. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard will make up the war council. Others will be invited to learn of our plans also," Jaime said, and he watched as the lords seemed relatively pleased by this, other than one or two who were a little put out. "My lords, my uncle has called his banners and the north has risen. House Tyrell has called its banners and the reach has risen. The lords of the Narrow Sea have called their banners and they too have risen. And I've now received word from Prince Oberyn. Dorne has risen for us also. We have houses in the Riverlands who've risen to my banner. My lords, now we rise to meet with our allies and to strike down our enemies," he said, and he could see the surprise on some faces. Lord Marbrand, the one to raise the question. "Dawn, your grace. Dawn, your grace. My brother and sister were of Dorne. My lord and their mother named me as her son, Prince Oberyn. Prince Doran are my kin, and I consider them my uncles, and they likewise me, their nephew. Dawn rises to see their kin on the throne," he said, and the lord nodded. "Can we be sure of the reach, your grace?" Lord Banford said. "Lady Marjorie is to be my wife, my lord. House Tyrell has sworn to my side, as has House Tarly. The reach rises for us," he said, and the lord and some others seemed pleased enough by that. "My lords, my nephew, and I bid you join us. There is something you should see," Tyrion said, and they moved towards the doors, the lords reluctantly following them and speaking to each other as they walked out onto the beach. "My lords of the West, by sea we have the advantage, by land we have the numbers, and by air we have..." He paused as Rhaenys and Lygaron came into view, the two dragons flying over the lords, some of who ducked and hit the ground. "Dragons," Tyrion added, smiling. "Tyrion." They sat in the meeting that evening looking over the maps. Lord Brax, Lord Craighall, Lord Marbrand, Arthur ostensibly as his guard, though Jay wished him there, and Barristan as a member of the council. Jaime, Tyrion, Kevan, and Gerion, who'd arrived that day, all sat around the table, and Jaime had told him that as king, he had to be the one to lay out their plans. "My lords, the Riverlands is where this war will be fought, just as it always is. The lords of the Vale and the Riverlands forces that are loyal to House Tully and the usurper's own forces will all try to march and join up, and we must see it doesn't happen, just as they will try and do the same with us," she said. Looking around the table, he watched as Roland looked to the Golden Tooth, and his Tytos did the same. "We will rally our allies in the Riverlands and take the roads, here, here, and here," he said, pointing to the map. "Walder Frey," Daemon asked, "will do what he always does, nothing, and then he'll try to wring the highest price he can for it," he said to Laughs. The Reach will be joined by the Dornish army and move to the Stormlands. Without them, Robert is even worse off than he already is. If we can also stop the Knights of the Vale from joining, then we have them where we wish. Why not just fly the dragons, Your Grace? We all know what happened in the Field of Fire. A sitting army is no match for a dragon. Titus said, The dragons are the hammer, my lord, but men are the anvil that the armies will be broken on. I can use the dragons, and I will. But they won't win us this war. They'll just make sure we don't lose, he said to Nods. You will use them, though? Damon asked. As sparingly as I can, my lord. I don't wish to be remembered as a man who burned men to death. One of those in my family is enough for many lifetimes. If needs must, though, and I am forced to use them to their full strengths, then I will. But I believe this works better. We'll break them together, and fear of the dragons can perhaps be just as effective as their flames themselves. He said and saw Barrister look to Jaime and nod. I think we're done for now, my lords. Let's rest. We ride soon. Jaime said, and the lords left, Loras and Jorahs walking into the room as Jay sat down. You did that well, Jerian said. That was easy, my lord. The hard part comes next. Now I have to go and tell Joy I'm leaving, he said to a laugh from Jerion. Jay, Riverrun. I want to lead our forces against it, Garion said when they stopped. My lord? I have my reasons. Will you give me this command? Garion asked, and Jay looked at Jaime, who nodded. You have it. Take Lord Craighall and Sir Adam with you, he said, and Jerion smiled as he stood up. Jerion, take no chances and take a damn burr, he said to more laughs. Now, what else have we to do here this night? Tyrion said, and Jay took out the piece of paper and handed it to his uncle. Your legitimization papers, Uncle Tyrion Targaryen, Prince of the Seven Kingdoms. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think? He said and saw the look Tyrion gave him, happy and yet a little sad that he was no longer a Lannister by name. Remember Tyrion, a dragon and a lion. He said and saw his uncle relax as he took out the next piece of paper. My will, he said and heard Loras gasp. Don't worry, I've no intent of dying. I've far too much work to do for that, he said as Loras relaxed. Daenerys, Tyrion said, and he nodded. I'd name you Uncle truly. I care not for what people would say. Bastard or true-born is just a load of horseshit. You're my uncle, my blood, and I'd name you. But what was done to Rhaenyra was wrong, and done by men who thought a woman couldn't lead. All of us in this room know the strength of the women in our lives. Dany is heir by right of blood, and that she's a woman makes no difference, he said and saw the nods. After the meeting, he walked from the room and out onto the beach, Loras and Walder beside him. Jorahs would guard his uncle, and would be joined by Sir Richard Horp if he wished to keep his cloak. Barristan having come to speak to him about the man, and Jay having no need of convincing, what he and Sir Aerys had done was proof enough of his worth. Tyrion had laughed when he suggested Bronn, saying not only was he not suited to the ideals of the Kingsguard, but there was no way in the Seven Hells he'd stick to the chastity vow. He had known that, and it hadn't been a true suggestion, more one based on him knowing how comfortable around Bronn his uncle was, and how capable the man himself could be. Dorne having shown that in spades, he thought as he watched his sister and son dip down into the water. They are in a playful mood tonight, Laura said from behind him. They know they'll be flying soon, as will I, she said. You're really taking to the sky? Loras asked. I need to fly Loras north to the Reach and this, he said, holding up the note. Can she take two, my king? Loras asked, and he turned to look at him. You wish to come? He asked, and his friend nodded. Satin? We won't be going right away, will we? Loras asked, and Jay chuckled. He spent the night with his sister as he had most nights, Rhaenys worried and excited to be taking their throne back. though it was the note he held in his hand that had her speaking animatedly to him that night. We would play on the cliffs, Jay, father, mother, and I. They'd let me run, and then they'd hold me as we looked out onto the sea. She said softly, I've seen it in our dreams, Ray, seen it from afar, to see it for true, gods. She said, it is our home, where we belong. Jay, more so than King's Landing or Winterfell or Casterly Rock, Dragonstone is our home, and I wish to see our banner fly over it once more, to share it with my brother. She said, and he leaned in against her. And him? He said softly, looking to Ligeron, who slept beside them. He wants it too, though lesser, not the same as you or I, she said, and he nodded at that. The next couple of days were hard, letting Tommen know about his mother, and then that he'd have to leave for a little while. Jay telling him that he needed to stay and see his sister, and finally telling him the truth about his father, all of it taking a lot out of the boy. When he had come to him and they'd spoken about his own mother, when he had Tyrion speak about Joanna, it seemed to have some effect, though it was telling him that he'd march with the army and they'd meet up soon, which had the most. All those conversations, though, paled into comparison with how nervous he felt about this one. Walking into the room and seeing her sitting combing her hair and being almost in awe at how much she'd grown. In the last year, she'd grown taller and was now almost of a height with Sansa, and the little girl he remembered was almost a distant memory. Until she looked at him, or she smiled, and then she was his joy once more. You're leaving, she said, and he nodded as he sat down on the bed. I must, he said as she turned to look at him through the looking glass rather than directly. Must you? She said almost angrily. All my life has been leading to this joy. My mother, my father, my sister and brother, their mother, this is for them. It's for my grandfather and uncles, my grandmother, for all they've taken from me, she said. I don't want you to go, she said softly. I know. Joy, sit with me, please, he said, and it took a moment for her to get up and walk over to him, but soon she was sitting on the bed beside him. He reached out and took her hand in his, raising it to his lips and kissing it. Feeling her lean into him, he put his arm around her shoulder and sat there for a moment, trying to come up with the words to say. When I first came here, I was excited. You know, a new place, a different start, training with Jaime and meeting everyone. But I was alone too. Everyone made me welcome, but I'd left my family behind and I was alone. Then one day, not long after arriving, I met a little girl and I wasn't alone anymore. I've never been alone since that day. Joy, since the day I met you, she said. She wrapped her arms around him and he held her tightly. She didn't cry, and that she was able to not, while he felt his own eyes well up, showed just how much she'd grown. You're my little sister, now and always, my princess, and I swear it on the old gods and the new, I'll return, and you and I will ride apples in winter. We'll have many enters to come. Joy, do you believe me? He asked. I believe you, she said as he kissed her cheek. I love you, Joy, he said, making her smile a little. Love you, Jan, she said back as he hugged her once more. The next morning he rode to Gendry and collected his armor. Looking at it, he had been overwhelmed at just how right he made it. It was his father's armor reborn, though the Valyrian steel was something he wished his father had been able to wear. Thanking the boy and riding back, he found himself not looking forward to the dinner that night. Garion had already set off, and soon the rest of the army would be doing likewise, Tyrion leaving with Ligeron to ride with one half, while Jaime left with the other. He said his goodbyes that night as he intended to leave early the next morning, Daisy hugging him, and he felt the bump in her stomach, the pregnancy far more pronounced now, and he cursed the timing of this war. Jenna almost had him in tears once more, as did Ashara. Cregan having left with Jerian in dusk. He looked to Brienne and Satin. He'd given Loras the last few nights off so he could spend time with his love, and Brienne would be riding with Walder and Barristan at Jaime's side. Others he'd see sooner rather than later. Willem was squired now to Sir Barristan and Walder to Sir Jorah's. Far too many people he cared about, though, would be marching to war, and he tried not to think of it as he looked them over. His eyes going to his little sister, and he smiled to see her keep a hold of her emotions, the not-so-little girl doing a far better job of it than he was once more. After a troubled night's sleep, he woke the next morning and ready to leave, only for Jamie to be waiting for him and dragging him to a spar. "I win," Jamie said, taking their match 5-3. "One day, Jamie, one day," he said with a smile which Jamie returned. "No." "I'll see you when?" Jamie asked. "I have to fly north, and then to the Reach, and then on to Dragonstone. A moon at most. I'll not stay away long," he said as Jamie handed him the water. "See that you don't, the Golden Tooth." Jamie asked. "The Golden Tooth," he said before he put the mug down. Jamie, "Aye." "Be safe, my king, be safe." "You too, Jamie," he said, and was surprised by the embrace that Jamie caught him in, though he was glad of it. "Remember the birds, Jamie," he said, and Jamie chuckled. "Aye, now go. The sooner you leave, the sooner you'll be back." He turned to walk away, stopped, and went to turn back to tell him all he meant to him, to speak to him and let him know, and he couldn't find the words. There was too many, and yet he couldn't find them all, deciding on the simplest in the end. "Jamie, you're the father I choose, always," he said, and saw the nod from Jamie, the words not needing to be spoken back as he turned and walked away. Tyrion stood on the beach, and he told him to use Lygaron only if he must. His uncle was ready for the war to come, and even more so for the marriage to come after it. As he looked at Satin and Loras saying their goodbyes, he turned to Barristan and whispered in his ear, before watching as Arthur and then Loras climbed up on Rhaenix's back, the saddle allowing them both to sit a little more comfortably. "Ghost to me," he said as he walked to where Lygaron was standing, telling his son he'd see him soon, and then turning to climb onto Rhaenix's back. He tried not to laugh as Ghost made all of them look like uncoordinated when the wolf ran and climbed up before sitting down on the fur in front of the saddle. Once he was sure everyone was comfortable, he closed his eyes and took a moment before opening them again. "Sylvegan Rhaenix," he said as the dragon took to the sky, the war for the throne finally at hand.